A millionaire passed a beggar with 2 children. He looked again and froze in shock. She was the last person he ever expected to see. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Marcus Sterling, 54 years old and graying at the temples, stepped out of the Sterling Innovations Tower on 5th Avenue that rainy afternoon, feeling both exhausted and oddly restless. The sky was a brooding grey, and sheets of rain pelted the sidewalks. As CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the country, Marcus was accustomed to the hum of Manhattan's rush hour. Yet that day, something in the air felt different, an uneasy pressure that weighed on him like the storm clouds overhead. He waved off his personal driver, deciding he would walk a few blocks before heading to a scheduled dinner meeting. His polished black shoes splashed through shallow puddles, and he flipped the collar of his tailored overcoat up in a futile attempt to shield himself from the downpour. The city was alive with the usual frenzy. Yellow cabs honking, pedestrians with umbrellas weaving around each other, steam billowing up from underground grates. Despite the familiar chaos, Marcus found his thoughts drifting to the past. He remembered being here 6 years ago, nearly at the same time of day, contemplating his future with Catherine Walsh, his fiancée back then. She had been a brilliant marketing executive, sharp and charismatic, with a ready laugh that brightened his darkest moods. They had planned to marry in a summer ceremony at a historical estate in upstate New York. Yet, on the eve of the wedding, Catherine vanished. She left only a cryptic note about consequences I cannot allow and disappeared without a word. Since then, Marcus's life had been measured in board meetings and profit margins, all overshadowed by the question, why? A clap of thunder shook him from his reverie. He rubbed at the knot of tension in his neck. As he approached a crowded intersection near a subway entrance, he spotted a small commotion, a woman huddled on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around 2 small children, the 3 of them shivering. Dozens of commuters rushed by, heads bowed beneath umbrellas, hardly noticing. Marcus felt a pang of discomfort. He was used to success stories, not tragic sights like this. He slowed down, unable to ignore the scene. The woman's clothes were soaked and threadbare. The children, a boy and a girl, were about 5 years old, clutching each other. Marcus's heart twisted with empathy. Something in their posture, the little girl's slender shoulders trembling against the woman's side, made him pause. He was about to slip some cash into the paper cup by her feet when the woman's face tilted up just enough for him to see. His pulse thundered in his ears. He took a step closer, mind reeling, the sallow cheeks, the tired eyes sunken from worry and lack of sleep. He recognized them, even though they looked drastically different from the vibrant features he once knew. This was Catherine Walsh, the same Catherine he had loved, the same Catherine who disappeared 6 years before their wedding could take place. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Rain kept pounding, and passers-by shoved past him, forcing him to keep his balance. It was as if Manhattan itself was indifferent to this reunion of 2 souls once bound for marriage. Catherine blinked, stunned to see him there. The children clung tighter to her, frightened by the tall stranger towering over them. "Catherine," he finally managed, voice trembling. She stiffened. She whispered his name in return. Marcus heard it, even though it was nearly lost in the clamor of the storm. He knelt down, ignoring the water soaking his expensive trousers. The gravity of her appearance, the fear in her eyes, made the city's noise fade into a distant roar. "Are you... What happened?" He tried to offer his hand. "Catherine, let me help." She recoiled, arms tightening protectively around the children. They were trembling, faces half hidden behind their mother. Catherine looked thin, almost fragile, but there was a fierce protectiveness in her gaze. "Don't," she muttered, her voice raw and jagged. "Don't do this." Marcus glanced at the boy and girl, who were wide-eyed with fear. His mind spun with unanswerable questions. Where had she been all this time? Why was she homeless? Who were these children? He swallowed, heart pounding, wishing he could pull her and the kids into the shelter of his coat. "Catherine, please, let me help you." He held out a handful of bills, desperate to do something, anything. She shook her head, water streaming down her face. "I don't need your money," she said, half lost in the noise of traffic and thunder. "Just leave us alone." A wave of people surged forward as the subway doors opened, and in that tumult, Catherine stood with the children, tried to steady them. Marcus stepped back slightly to avoid colliding with someone brushing past. He lost sight of her for an instant. When he tried to move closer again, Catherine and the kids slipped into the crowd, heading toward the station. By the time he pushed his way through, they were gone. He stood at the top of the subway steps, rain-soaked, mind-racing, uncertain where to turn. The woman he had been searching for, in countless quiet ways, was right here in front of him. And then she was gone. His chest felt tight, breath short. He had to find her again, had to understand how she ended up like this. As the storm raged on, he realized this moment would change his life forever. Marcus spent the rest of that afternoon in a haze, barely registering the downpour that soaked his clothes as he walked aimlessly through Manhattan. Every so often he'd catch a glimpse of a mother with her child or a figure huddled under an awning, and his heart would leap with hope, only to sink in disappointment when he realized it wasn't Catherine. The way she had looked at him, part shock, part alarm, haunted his thoughts. He couldn't fathom how Catherine, once a high-powered marketing executive, had ended up on the streets. She was the woman who used to negotiate million-dollar deals and charm entire boardrooms. He remembered her vividly, her crisp-tailored suits, the confident stride that commanded attention, and the quick mind that always kept him on his toes. Now that image collided with the woman clutching two children in ragged clothes on a rain-swept sidewalk. Nothing made sense. Late that evening, he finally made his way back to his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. The city lights blinked through the floor-to-ceiling windows, giving the spacious living room a faint glow. Marcus draped his soaked coat over a chair and ran a hand through his damp hair. He ignored the blinking red light on his phone, indicating missed calls, most likely from his executive assistant or, more urgently, from his younger sister Elizabeth, who often checked on him after a long day. Eventually, he mustered the energy to check his messages. As he expected, Elizabeth had called twice, sounding frustrated that he was ignoring important business matters. Another voicemail was from an associate reminding him of a crucial meeting regarding a merger Sterling Innovations was pursuing. Normally, he would have been laser-focused on these responsibilities. Tonight, he could barely bring himself to care. He poured himself a glass of water, though part of him craved something stronger. But the memory of Catherine's face kept him alert and sober. Settling onto the leather couch, he grabbed the old scrapbook he kept hidden on a nearby shelf, a habit from sleepless nights when thoughts of Catherine overtook him. He flipped through photographs of them smiling at charity events, enjoying dinner with friends, or strolling through Central Park. His eyes lingered on one particular photo, Catherine laughing, her hair caught in a breeze, her hand resting on his arm. They looked so hopeful, so certain about the future. He remembered the day she vanished, how a single cryptic note was all she had left behind, claiming she had to do what was necessary. For years, Marcus had carried a sense of guilt, wondering if he had said something or done something that drove her away. He had even hired a private investigator back then, but the trail went cold within weeks. Now he realized there might be more to her disappearance. She was clearly running from something or someone, and it had forced her to endure unimaginable hardship. His phone buzzed again, Elizabeth calling once more. With a sigh, he answered, already bracing for her concerned yet impatient tone. "Marcus! Good Lord! Where have you been all day?" Elizabeth's voice came through crisply. She was 48, a fiercely intelligent woman with a knack for cutting through nonsense. He hesitated. I saw someone. Someone I've been looking for." Elizabeth's tone softened. "Catherine." He knew it wouldn't surprise her. She had been the only family member who truly understood how deeply Catherine's disappearance had affected him. "Yes. She's in trouble, Liz. Living on the streets, and she has children." Silence on the other end. Finally, she spoke, voice tinged with disbelief. "Are you sure it was her?" "Yes," he said firmly, a wave of sadness swelling in his chest. "I'd never forget her face." Elizabeth sighed. "Marcus, I'm sorry, that must have been a shock, but you realize we have pressing business. The board expects a finalized pitch for the merger. The entire future of Sterling Innovations might hinge on this deal." "I know," he said, rubbing his forehead, "but I can't just ignore what I saw. Catherine needs help." "Marcus, be careful. You tried everything you could to find her years ago, and it nearly destroyed you." Elizabeth paused, her voice carrying genuine concern. "I'm not saying you should abandon her now. Just think about the consequences of diving back into that search. This company is not just your livelihood, it's the legacy our parents left us." He ended the call not long after, with Elizabeth urging him to get some rest and meet her the next day to discuss business strategy. But as he set the phone aside, his mind churned with questions. Who were those children? Why had Catherine refused his help? And what could have possibly driven her to vanish so completely? He stepped over to the window, gazing out at the rain that continued to sheet across the glass. Manhattan glistened below, vibrant and pitiless. He remembered the fear in Catherine's eyes, the way she held onto those kids as if she were shielding them from danger. Marcus knew one thing for certain. He had to find a way to help her, regardless of the cost. The following morning, Marcus awoke to a dreary grey sky. The storm from the previous day had subsided, leaving behind sodden streets and a hint of humidity that clung to the August air. He dressed for work out of habit, an impeccably tailored navy suit, starched white shirt and subdued tie, but his thoughts were miles away from corporate deals. As he descended to the lobby, the doorman nodded politely. "Morning, Mr. Sterling Cab, sir?" Marcus shook his head, deciding once again to walk. He slipped on a pair of comfortable leather shoes rather than his usual shiny Oxfords. The route to Sterling Innovations was ingrained in him after years of routine, but this time his eyes scanned every corner, looking for any sign of Catherine. He saw only the usual bustle, business people clutching coffee cups, tourists gazing at skyscrapers, vendors hawking bagels, no familiar faces from the night before. He arrived at his office building earlier than usual, determined to push forward. However, the boardroom presented immediate tensions. Elizabeth was already there, standing by the window with two other executives. They stopped talking the moment Marcus entered, a sure sign they'd been discussing him. "Marcus," Elizabeth greeted, forcing a smile. "Let's get started, shall we?" He took his seat at the head of the long mahogany table. Plans for the upcoming merger were projected on a large screen, bullet points detailing acquisitions and expansions. Normally, he would be engrossed in every line of the proposal. Today, he barely registered the slides. His mind wandered to a back alley or a busy subway station where Catherine might be hiding. When Elizabeth noticed his distracted demeanor, she cleared her throat. "Marcus, we need your input on the revised contract. The legal team wants confirmation on certain indemnities." He blinked, trying to refocus. "Yes, of course. Let's..." Let's ensure the best terms for both parties. Our brand must remain intact. One of the other executives, a stern-faced man named Nolan Burke, leaned forward. Sir, the brand will be intact, but the board is concerned about your recent absences. With negotiations entering a critical stage, any perceived instability could derail the deal. Elizabeth placed a gentle hand on Marcus's arm. We can handle the details, but we need your full support, or the other side might sense hesitation. Marcus inhaled slowly. The legacy of Sterling Innovations rested on his ability to lead decisively, but he couldn't silence the voice inside, telling him that Catherine's plight mattered more than any corporate success. The tension was almost suffocating. I understand, he finally said, his tone measured. I'll review everything tonight. Right now, I have a personal situation that demands my attention. Nolan exchanged a wary glance with Elizabeth. Marcus could feel their unspoken worry. If the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise faltered, it could shake investor confidence. After the meeting, Elizabeth lingered. Marcus, she began, crossing her arms, I know Catherine's return must be overwhelming, but we can't lose focus now. He met her gaze. Liz, I'm not abandoning the company, but Catherine is homeless, living on the streets with 2 kids, her kids. I can't pretend that doesn't matter. She sighed. I understand. Just promise me you won't do anything reckless. This merger is crucial to so many employees and shareholders. We owe it to them to keep a steady hand. Once Elizabeth left, he found himself alone in the boardroom. The silence pressed in on him. He thought about Catherine's note from 6 years ago, which he had read so many times the ink was beginning to fade. She had written something about protecting what matters most, a phrase that might finally be coming into focus. Before the day ended, Marcus made a decision. He rummaged through his old contacts list and found the number of Rob Halifax, a private investigator he had hired after Catherine's disappearance. Rob had come up empty-handed back then, but perhaps now things would be different. He dialed the number, each ring amplifying the tension in his chest. When Rob answered, his voice was as gruff as Marcus remembered. After Marcus explained the situation, the sighting of Catherine, the children, her refusal of help, Rob let out a low whistle. 6 years is a long time, Rob said. She must have been on the move if nobody found her before. If she's still in the city, I'll find out. But this might get messy if there's more to her disappearance than just cold feet. Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. Messy or not, I need answers. Rob hesitated. You sure about this, Marcus? Last time you got close to tracking her, you weren't in a good place afterward. Marcus felt a jolt of old pain. The fruitless search back then had worn him to the bone, but now he had seen Catherine with his own eyes. I'm sure, he said, voice firm. Let's start with local shelters, soup kitchens, anywhere a mother with young children might go for help. Hanging up, he left the boardroom, ignoring the curious stares of employees. He took the elevator down to the lobby, uncertain of exactly where he was headed, only that his quest to find Catherine would no longer be half-hearted. The city beyond the revolving doors felt colder today, though the skies had cleared. He pictured Catherine trying to keep the children warm, possibly terrified of being discovered. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, a swirl of questions plagued him. Who or what had forced Catherine to vanish? Why would she rather hide than accept help from him? And how could he stand by and let the woman he once intended to marry, perhaps still loved, remain lost in the crowd? Marcus rose early the next day, deciding to meet Rob at a modest diner in Midtown. The 2 men hadn't crossed paths in years. Rob Halifax was in his early 50s, a little heavier than Marcus remembered, with thinning hair and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. He wore a beaten leather jacket that bore the scuffs of years trailing lost souls through city streets. They slid into a booth near the window, the smell of coffee and frying bacon thick in the air. A waitress with a warm smile set cups of steaming coffee before them without asking. Marcus took a sip, savoring the surge of caffeine. "Never thought we'd be sitting together again under these circumstances," Rob remarked, stirring sugar into his cup. "Last time, it was all about Catherine, too. She's the only reason we're here," Marcus said quietly. "But this time, there are 2 children involved. That changes everything." Rob nodded and pulled out a small notepad. "Tell me again what you saw." Marcus described the rainy sidewalk, Catherine's exhaustion, and the children's fearful expressions. He explained how she ran when he tried to help. Rob jotted down a few notes, pausing occasionally to ask for clarification. "So, she recognized you," Rob stated. "She said my name." "Yes," Marcus replied, remembering the faint tremor in her voice. "And she told me to stay away." Rob exhaled. "This could mean she doesn't want you involved in whatever trouble she's in, or she thinks she's protecting you from it." Marcus felt a flare of frustration. "But from what? I have resources. I could help her financially, legally, whatever it takes. People on the streets don't always trust white knights," Rob said gently. "Sometimes they've been burned so badly they can't accept help. Or, in Catherine's case, she might be running from something bigger. If she thinks you might draw attention, she'll avoid you." They discussed a plan. Rob would tap into his network of contacts at local shelters, community centers, and even law enforcement. They'd look for any record of a mother with 2 young kids who'd never stay in one place for long. Marcus agreed to fund whatever was necessary: hotel stays, informant fees, anything that could lead them to Catherine. At 9 o'clock, sharp, Marcus excused himself. He had a conference call with the board. Before heading to his office, he pulled Rob aside. "She left me once before without an explanation. I can't let her vanish again, not like this." Rob placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I'll do my best." Marcus arrived at Sterling Innovations with minutes to spare, jumping on the conference call. Elizabeth and Nolan led the discussion about the merger's final terms, but Marcus's mind wandered. When asked for input, he stumbled through half-hearted endorsements. Elizabeth shot him concerned looks, but didn't press him in front of the others. After the call ended, she pulled him aside. "Marcus, this is serious. You're not thinking clearly. The lawyers need a signature by Friday on the contract amendments. Are you sure you can handle that?" He bristled, though he knew she was right. "I'll handle it," he said, shuffling some papers on his desk. "I promise." Elizabeth sighed, her eyes searching his. "I've never seen you so distracted. Maybe we can postpone the final negotiations for a week or 2, give you space to figure out your personal matters." Marcus's pride flared. "That won't be necessary. I'm not letting the company down." She studied him, perhaps recalling how devastating Catherine's disappearance had been the first time. "Okay," she said finally, "just don't push yourself too far." The board is already worried. He busied himself for the next few hours, but every now and then he checked his phone, hoping Rob had some news. By late afternoon, no calls came. The tension in his chest grew. He replayed Catherine's anguished expression over and over, feeling an undercurrent of guilt that he hadn't found her sooner. As the sun began to set, Marcus left the office. He walked through the city streets, scanning the faces of passers-by, with a futile hope that she might appear. The weight of corporate obligations pressed on him from one side, while the urgency to find Catherine weighed on him from the other. He was used to pressure. Board meetings and competitive markets were second nature, yet this personal turmoil, with its moral stakes, felt far heavier. He paused at a street corner where a busker played a mournful saxophone tune. The music resonated with his sense of loneliness and regret. Catherine had once been an integral part of his life, someone he imagined building a family with. Now she was on the run, exhausted and vulnerable. He couldn't bear the thought of failing her again. The next day brought a restless energy Marcus couldn't shake. After a sleepless night, he decided to meet Rob again, this time at a small coffee shop tucked away near a subway entrance, coincidentally the same station where Catherine had vanished. Rob had been working late, chasing down leads, calling in favors. Once they settled at a corner table, Marcus caught the look of weariness in Rob's eyes. "Any luck?" he asked, voice hushed. Rob exhaled heavily. "I found a shelter worker who recognized the description. A woman with 2 kids, boy and a girl, about 5 or 6, came by a few times, but never stayed the night. Said she was skittish, like she was afraid someone would track her." Marcus leaned forward. "That's Catherine. Did she say where Catherine went?" Shaking his head, Rob replied, "She didn't share much, except one detail. Catherine spoke about needing to keep moving, not wanting to sign any paperwork. She told another woman there that she couldn't risk leaving a trail." Marcus's heart pounded. "Leaving a trail for whom?" "That's the question," Rob said grimly. "There might be people out there looking for her. She's worried about exposing her children to danger, apparently. She's also turned down food stamps or assistance because that requires registration." "Can you track her through any of those programs quietly?" Marcus asked. Rob frowned. "It's risky. She's not leaving a legal footprint. We'd be digging into government records. That means pulling strings in an official capacity. If she's running from something serious, it could alert the wrong people." Marcus hesitated. He thought of Catherine's desperate expression. "I don't want to put her in more danger, but I can't let her go on like this." They left the coffee shop and stood on the sidewalk near the subway steps. A steady flow of commuters poured in and out, the clang of trains echoing below. Marcus noticed a young mother tugging her daughter's hand, the child grumbling about going to school. The sight made him ache for Catherine's children, who likely had no stable routine, no sense of safety. "I can poke around more, but it'll take time," Rob said, lighting a cigarette. "You need to prepare yourself. This might get complicated, especially if powerful players are involved." Marcus weighed the risk. "Do it. I'll cover any expenses, and if we need legal support, I'll call my team." Rob gave a slow nod. "All right, but I want to be sure you know what you're in for." Marcus only had to think for a moment. "I can't ignore it anymore." As they parted ways, Marcus felt the pull of 2 worlds colliding, the high-stakes corporate realm demanding his attention and this moral imperative that overshadowed everything else. He made a choice, then and there, to prioritize finding Catherine, no matter the fallout. Hours later, back at Sterling Innovations, Elizabeth caught him in the hallway. She had the merger documents in hand and a troubled look on her face. "They need final signatures by Friday," she said. "Are you ready to sign off?" Marcus rubbed his temples, tension throbbing. "I'll make sure it gets done." She studied him closely. "You haven't said much about Catherine since you saw her. Is there any news?" He hesitated. Elizabeth was the one person who might understand, yet her concern for the company was paramount. "I hired Rob Halifax again." Her eyes widened slightly. "Marcus, that's going to stir up a lot. He doesn't work cheaply, and he tends to ask questions that can draw attention." "I know, but Catherine is worth it." He paused, then added more softly, "I won't let her slip away a second time." Elizabeth set the paperwork on a nearby desk. "Listen, I won't pretend to understand what she's been through, but I do worry about you. 6 years ago, you nearly lost yourself after her disappearance. And the board. Some members are already whispering that your judgment might be compromised. Please be careful." He gave a brief nod, unsure how to respond. On one hand, he was touched by her concern. On the other, he felt the creeping dread of corporate backlash. If the board lost faith in him, he could be forced out, which would strip him of the resources that might ultimately save Catherine. That evening, in his office overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, Marcus stared at the merger contracts. His mind drifted to Catherine's small frame, cradling those children in her arms. He remembered her brilliant smile on the day he first hired her to manage a major marketing campaign. She had impressed him with her passion and empathy, qualities that eventually drew him to propose marriage. Now, the memory of that hope contrasted painfully with her current reality. He placed the contracts in his briefcase, a silent acknowledgement that he had obligations to fulfill. Yet an even greater obligation loomed in his heart, to uncover the truth behind Catherine's disappearance and offer her the help she clearly needed. Despite her resistance, he felt a tremor of uncertainty. By refusing to let go of Catherine again, he risked upending his entire world, including the company's future. But for Marcus, there was no real choice left to make. He picked up his phone, determined to contact Rob one last time before nightfall, prepared to take the next step. Marcus stood near a bustling midtown intersection, scanning the faces of strangers and wondering if Catherine could be among them. Honking taxis, rushing pedestrians, and the faint aroma of pretzels from a nearby food cart all merged into a familiar city symphony. Yet, for all its familiarity, New York suddenly felt like a maze he no longer knew how to navigate. He had just finished speaking on the phone with Rob Halifax, who had no new leads that morning. Rob had mentioned investigating a series of charity organizations that aided women in crisis. Hoping to speed things along, Marcus decided to check one such place himself, a small non-profit center known for providing resources to homeless families. The building, though modest, was well maintained, with a faded sign that read, Hearts United Community Center. Inside, a sense of calm replaced the chaos of the street. A few children played quietly in a corner, while a tired-looking mother filled out paperwork at the reception desk. Posters on the walls advocated for mental health support, job placement assistance, and free legal counseling. Marcus felt a pang, recalling that Catherine had once organized marketing campaigns for causes like this. Approaching the front desk, he spoke with a volunteer named Randy, who smiled politely. "May I help you, sir?" Marcus hesitated. "I'm looking for someone, an old friend who might have come here. She has 2 small children, around 5 or 6. I'm not sure if she's used the services here, but I'm trying to locate her." Randy frowned sympathetically. "We have a lot of families come in. Do you have a name?" "Catherine Walsh," Marcus said, his heart beating faster. "I'm afraid she may be in trouble." Randy scanned a clipboard. "I'm not seeing that name in our recent logs. People sometimes give aliases, though, but I can introduce you to one of our social workers. She might recognize who you're describing." A few minutes later, Marcus found himself in a small office decorated with children's drawings. Behind a cluttered desk sat a woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped hair and a resolute expression. Her nameplate read Jennifer Matthews, but she offered a warm handshake and said, "Call me Jenny, everyone here does." Marcus settled into a plastic chair that creaked under his weight. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm Marcus Sterling." Jenny arched an eyebrow. "Sterling, as in Sterling Innovations." He nodded, used to that reaction. "Yes, but I'm here on a personal matter." She leaned forward, genuine interest in her eyes. "Tell me about your friend and how I can help." He explained his encounter with Catherine, careful not to overwhelm Jenny with corporate details. He described the children's appearance, Catherine's refusal of help, and the desperation in her eyes. Jenny listened quietly, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. When he finished, she set her pen down. "I haven't met this Catherine, but your story sounds all too familiar. A lot of people, especially mothers, stay off the grid to avoid being found by the wrong person or system. They float between shelters, avoid signing forms, keep their children out of school." Marcus exhaled slowly. I'm worried she's running from something dangerous. She mentioned she had no one to trust, but I want to help. Jenny regarded him thoughtfully. If she's hiding, she might be afraid your involvement could bring attention. It's not uncommon for women in crisis to fear their old connections. Sometimes it's a controlling partner or a powerful enemy. The question is, can you convince her you're not a threat? Marcus felt a twinge of guilt. I don't even know what she's up against. The last time I saw her, she vanished, left me right before our wedding. I never got an explanation. Now she won't speak to me. Jenny clicked her pen thoughtfully. Look, I can keep an eye out, ask other social workers, see if anyone matching Catherine's description has come through. If I find her, I'll let her know you're looking. Her eyes flickered with empathy. But understand, I can't force her to see you. I know, Marcus said quietly. I just need to be sure she's safe, especially with those kids. Jenny leaned back in her chair. There's another angle. Sometimes, mothers in her situation reach out indirectly for help. They might not trust the system, but they'll confide in someone else on the street. If you want to find her, you should learn more about what life is like for homeless families, where they sleep, which outreach programs they visit. I can introduce you to community liaisons who actually walk these streets every day. Marcus nodded. Thank you. Anything you can do. Before he left, Jenny handed him a brochure listing various shelters and outreach events. We host a weekly soup kitchen on Thursdays. It's free and open. Maybe you can volunteer. If Catherine shows up, you'd see her in a less threatening context. He accepted the brochure. I'll be there. As he stepped back into the bright sunshine outside, Marcus felt a flicker of hope amid the gnawing worry. He had just met a potential ally who seemed genuinely invested in helping him reach Catherine. Yet uncertainty still gnawed at him. What if Catherine had no intention of ever being found? What if she believed she was protecting him by keeping her distance? Holding the brochure tightly, Marcus decided that if volunteering at a soup kitchen was a step toward crossing into Catherine's world, a world he barely understood, then he would take it. For the first time in a long while, he felt an ounce of determination beyond mere business survival. Now it was personal, and he was willing to learn whatever it took to save her from the shadows. The week rolled on with a relentless pace, and Thursday evening finally arrived. Marcus, still dressed in his pressed shirt and slacks from a day of back-to-back meetings, stood outside Hearts United Community Center. The building now buzzed with volunteers and a line of people waiting for a hot meal. He inhaled deeply, bracing himself, and then stepped inside. He was greeted by the hum of conversation, the clatter of metal chairs, and the aroma of freshly cooked pasta. Jenny Matthews appeared, bustling between tables with a clipboard. She spotted Marcus and waved him over, handing him a volunteer apron. "You made it," she said, ushering him toward a table stacked with trays of bread. "Start by distributing these, and if you feel comfortable, talk to people. See if anyone might have seen Catherine." Marcus slipped the apron over his head. It felt odd. He was used to commanding boardrooms, not passing out bread rolls in a crowded soup kitchen. But he reminded himself this was necessary if he ever hoped to find Catherine. He began walking the rows of tables, offering bread and politely greeting the individuals who sat hunched over their meals. Some looked up with weary gratitude, while others kept their eyes averted. Many were older, their faces etched with lines of hardship. A few were mothers with children, casting anxious glances around them. Marcus wondered if Catherine had once looked like these women, tired, fearful, unsure where her next meal would come from. A little girl, with braided pigtails, giggled when Marcus offered her an extra bread roll. She reminded him of Catherine's daughter, whose small face he had glimpsed in the rain. He swallowed the lump in his throat and managed a smile. "You like bread?" he asked softly. The girl nodded, her mother gently tapping her shoulder. "Say thank you, Rosie." "Thank you," Rosie murmured, her voice muffled. Marcus continued his rounds, eventually reaching a quieter corner where a man in a threadbare jacket huddled over his bowl of soup. He introduced himself, offering bread. The man eyed him suspiciously but accepted. "Name's Terence," he said after a moment. "You new here? I ain't seen you volunteer before." Marcus acknowledged this with a friendly nod. "Yes, first time. I'm looking for someone. A woman with 2 small kids about 5 or 6. She might avoid shelters, maybe stays on the move." Terence scratched his unkempt beard. "Lots of women like that, man. Streets can be rough." "I understand," Marcus replied carefully, trying to avoid sounding desperate. "But if you ever see her, she has dark hair. The kids, 1 boy, 1 girl. I just want to make sure they're all right." Terence studied him. "Some folks out here run from trouble. You sure you ain't trouble?" Marcus sighed. "I hope not. I used to be close with her. I just want to help." After a moment's pause, Terence shrugged. "I can keep an eye out. No promises, though." "People like her, they vanish if they think someone's on their tail." Marcus thanked him and turned to head back toward the serving area. He spotted Jenny near the front, speaking warmly with a woman who was timidly asking about temporary housing. Despite the chaos, Jenny maintained a calm presence, an anchor for those who had lost almost everything. At the end of the night, as the kitchen volunteers began cleaning up, Marcus helped stack chairs and wipe down tables. He noticed how methodically the staff worked, each volunteer playing a role in restoring order until the next wave of need arrived. Jenny joined him, rolling up her sleeves to rinse dishes. "So, how was your first night on the front lines?" Marcus set a stack of plates on a drying rack. "Eye-opening, humbling. I talked to a few people, but no solid leads on Catherine yet." She nodded. "It's rarely that simple. If she's really determined to stay hidden, finding her might take some time." He leaned against the counter, letting the warm steam of the kitchen soothe his tense muscles. "Time is the problem. I feel like every day that passes, she could be at more risk." Jenny offered a sympathetic half-smile. "Use this opportunity to understand more about what she might be going through. It'll make you better equipped to help her when you do find her. And hey, if it's any consolation, your presence here made an impression. People notice when someone new shows up and genuinely cares." Before leaving, Marcus exchanged phone numbers with Jenny, ensuring a direct line of communication in case Catherine appeared. Outside, the summer air was still heavy but held a note of promise. He realized he felt less helpless than he had in weeks. He had done something tangible, however small. As he walked back to his car, a flood of thoughts swirled. He recalled Catherine's fierce independence, her pride in forging her own path. The woman he saw in the rain was still Catherine, but her circumstances were unimaginable. He couldn't shake the suspicion that something darker lurked behind her disappearance, some shadowy force that wouldn't let her simply return to him. Yet there was also a flicker of hope. The possibility that, by taking slow, steady steps into her world, he might gain her trust again, or at least be near enough to offer his hand if she ever needed it. It was a fragile notion, but Marcus clung to it. After all, hope was sometimes the only thing standing between a person and despair. Marcus found himself riding the subway at an hour he usually spent in the quiet comfort of his penthouse. The rattling train was far from his usual chauffeured car service, but he wanted to see for himself the places Catherine might frequent. It was late, nearing midnight, and the dim fluorescent lights overhead cast an eerie glow on the mostly empty car. He got off near a cluster of shelters on the Lower East Side that Rob had suggested he check. The neighborhood streets felt different at night. Shadows loomed, and the hum of distant traffic was punctuated by the occasional shout or siren. Marcus tightened his grip on his phone, ready to call a cab if the situation turned unsafe. But he pressed on, determined. The first shelter he tried had just turned away the night's overflow, directing people to another facility a few blocks down. Marcus spoke with a bleary-eyed staff member who couldn't recall seeing Catherine or two young children. Disappointed, he moved on to the next building, an imposing structure with chipped paint and a neon sign flickering overhead. A security guard at the entrance nodded curtly as he approached. "Evening," Marcus offered. "I'm looking for someone, a woman, dark hair, 2 kids, about 5 or 6 years old." The guard eyed him skeptically. "You a cop?" "No," Marcus answered, forcing a smile. "I'm just trying to help a friend." The guard shrugged. "I see a lot of people in and out, man. Hard to keep track. But I can tell you, families with kids usually go to the women's wing. It's locked down, though, privacy and all." Marcus was about to press further when a middle-aged woman with kind eyes emerged from inside. She introduced herself as Sister Mary, explaining that the shelter was connected to a small church community. "We do what we can," she said, offering a gentle smile. "But the demand is always greater than the supply of beds." He described Catherine as best he could, choosing his words carefully to avoid scaring off a potential ally. Sister Mary listened, then led him into a small office that doubled as storage for donated clothes. They looked through sign-in sheets, but nothing matched Catherine's name or even a close alias. "That doesn't necessarily mean she hasn't been here," Sister Mary observed. "We don't force people to use their real names. Some come in overnight and leave before dawn." Marcus rubbed his forehead. "I was afraid of that." She glanced at him sympathetically. "If she's that determined not to be found, I doubt a name on a list will help. But there's a volunteer who handles outreach for women in more precarious situations, runaways, people escaping domestic violence. Maybe she has heard something. Come back tomorrow afternoon. I'll arrange a meeting." Thanking her, he left, feeling both grateful and frustrated. Every conversation revealed the same truth. Catherine might be right under his nose, yet still too elusive to pin down. As he walked along the dimly lit street toward the nearest taxi stand, he noticed how each alleyway seemed to beckon with potential secrets. He pictured Catherine crouched in a doorway, trying to keep her children warm, scanning for any sign of danger. The thought made him shudder. He recalled her brave spirit from years ago, always ready to tackle challenges head-on. What had shattered that confidence so drastically that she'd choose this life instead of reaching out? When Marcus finally climbed into a cab, he felt exhaustion wash over him. He had a morning meeting to finalize merger terms, but the late-night search had driven home the harsh reality of Catherine's situation. She wasn't simply missing, she was entrenched in a hidden part of the city, one that shielded its inhabitants with secrecy born of fear. The cab rattled uptown, passing through neighborhoods that transitioned from dilapidated storefronts to glittering high-rises. He thought of Elizabeth, and how she'd worry if she knew what he was doing at this hour. He imagined her warning him about personal safety and the risks to his reputation if word got out that he was cruising homeless shelters late at night. Yet none of that mattered. What mattered was the woman he once loved, now trapped in a life that defied everything she had been. And while the city's darkness held many questions, Marcus felt more certain than ever that he had to keep walking this path. It was the only way to find Catherine. If that meant navigating unfamiliar streets and defying the comfort of his usual routine, so be it. As the cab rolled to a stop at his building, Marcus paid the fare and stepped onto the well-lit sidewalk. He looked up at the towering structure he called home, an emblem of his success and privilege. Somewhere out there, Catherine was in the shadows, fighting to survive another night. Stifling a weary sigh, Marcus realized that his search had only begun, and with each step into uncharted territory, he was crossing further away from the life he once knew. The next afternoon, Marcus returned to the shelter run by Sister Mary. The air was thick with humidity, and a faint promise of rain lingered in the steel-grey sky. With the demands of his executive role mounting, he had managed only a quick handshake and minimal input during the morning's merger meeting. Elizabeth flashed him concerned looks, but he rushed away as soon as he could, determined to follow this lead. Sister Mary greeted him warmly at the reception desk, then led him to a modest sitting area where a middle-aged woman sorted donated items. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. Sister Mary introduced her as Lorna Fields, an outreach coordinator who specialized in assisting women who feared being tracked. Lorna offered a reserved smile. "Sister Mary told me about Catherine. Can you describe her again?" Marcus did his best to recount Catherine's height, approximate build, and the children's appearance. Lorna listened intently, occasionally tapping her chin. "I've encountered a handful of women who fit that description. They're all terrified, usually have no official records, and move constantly. I'll need more details, her habits, any medical needs the children might have, whether she had bruises or injuries." He thought back to that rainy night. She looked thin, worn out. One of the kids was coughing, but I couldn't tell if it was serious. She refused any help. It felt like she was trying to protect them from me or from something else. Lorna nodded sympathetically. "Fear does that. Sometimes these women are fleeing domestic abuse or threats. Other times, they witness something that puts them in danger." Marcus felt a chill at the possibility. If she's fleeing a threat, how do I convince her I'm not part of it? Lorna's eyes softened. "Often, you can't convince them right away. It takes time and trust. But if I see anyone resembling Catherine, I'll let her know there's someone looking for her who seems genuinely concerned." Sister Mary placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "If we do find her, we can't force a reunion. We hope you understand." He nodded, struggling to mask his frustration. "I do. I just don't want her to believe she's alone." They wrapped up their conversation, agreeing to stay in contact. As Marcus stepped out onto the steps of the shelter, he felt the vibration of his phone in his pocket. It was Rob, calling with urgent news. "Marcus," Rob said, his voice clipped. "I've been digging around some corporate corners. Might be unrelated, but I stumbled on something interesting. Catherine used to work for a rival tech firm, right?" "You told me that once." Marcus recalled a brief period when Catherine consulted for a competitor before she joined Sterling Innovations. "Yes, a company called Ventex Solutions." "Well, I found an old Ventex employee who says Catherine uncovered some unethical practices years ago, fraudulent data reporting, misappropriation of funds, that kind of thing. She confronted management. Soon after, she quit, claiming she couldn't stay silent." Marcus's pulse quickened. "That was right before I hired her. She never mentioned any details," Rob continued. "There's more. Ventex apparently faced legal threats about those practices, but everything got swept under the rug. She might have known enough to cause some real damage if she blew the whistle." A knot formed in Marcus's stomach. "You think someone from Ventex could have forced her into hiding?" "Possibly," Rob replied. "If she refused to keep quiet, she could have been threatened. Her disappearance right before your wedding might not have been a coincidence. It might have been orchestrated. Some folks will do anything to keep a scandal under wraps." Marcus's thoughts raced. Catherine had always been morally driven. If she discovered wrongdoing, she wouldn't hesitate to speak up. Could that have led to intimidation? Worse yet, if Ventex realized she intended to marry Sterling Innovations' CEO, the stakes might have become even higher. I need more evidence, Marcus said, voice tense. I'm working on it, Rob assured him, but be careful. If Ventex or any related party is behind this, your renewed interest might draw unwanted attention. Marcus ended the call, stepping away from the shelter's stoop into the hazy afternoon light. A swirl of emotions, fear, anger, regret, clashed within him. If Catherine had been hiding from corporate enemies, she might have believed that staying away from him protected him, his company, or both. Yet the question remained, why involve the children? Were they hers and his? The timeline suggested otherwise. She vanished 6 years ago, and the kids looked about 5. He stared at the passing traffic, feeling the weight of a painful realization. Catherine had been carrying secrets alone, risking not only her own safety, but also the security of those 2 little lives. He had come here searching for a single missing person, but he might have stumbled onto a far larger conspiracy. And if that was the case, neither Catherine nor her children would be safe until the truth came out. Marcus hurried back to Sterling Innovations for an afternoon meeting he'd scheduled at the last minute with his personal lawyer, Robert Gray, a longtime family friend in his late 50s. Gray had represented the Sterling family for decades, handling everything from estate issues to corporate mergers. If there was anyone who could advise Marcus on delicate legal matters, it was him. They sat in Marcus's sleek office, the city skyline framed by the tall windows. Gray pursed his lips as he listened to Marcus recount what Rob had discovered about Ventex Solutions and Catherine's possible whistleblowing. When you say she uncovered fraud, Gray began, adjusting his rectangular glasses, what kind of fraud are we talking about? Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his desk. I don't have exact documents yet, but it involved data manipulation and siphoning funds from philanthropic initiatives. It's the kind of thing that could ruin reputations if exposed. Gray tapped a pen against his notebook. You realize that if Catherine can provide proof, assuming she still has it, Ventex and any partners involved could face massive legal repercussions. That gives them motive to keep her silent. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's what I'm afraid of. She was always fearless about doing the right thing. She must have refused to be coerced, and when that failed, they might have forced her into hiding. Gray shook his head gravely. Terrible, but you need to tread carefully. If Ventex or others sense you're closing in, they could escalate. And from a corporate standpoint, if the media picks up a story linking your hunt for Catherine to some huge scandal, Sterling Innovations might be accused of interfering or stirring up trouble with a competitor. Marcus exhaled, running a hand through his hair. This is bigger than a corporate PR risk. A woman I care about is in danger, and there are 2 children potentially at risk. I can't just stand by. Gray offered a reluctant nod. I understand. Let me see what I can do. I'll contact some legal colleagues who specialize in corporate fraud cases. We need to know the scope of Ventex's wrongdoing. If Catherine has evidence and decides to come forward, we have to be ready with legal protections. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, Robert, and keep this discreet. I don't want the board blindsided until I have solid facts. Gray gave a small, reassuring smile. I'll handle it. After Gray departed, Marcus's next visitor was Elizabeth, who had caught wind of his sudden meeting. She walked in, her eyes narrowing. Marcus, the entire board is talking about your abrupt legal consult. Is there something you'd like to share? He forced calm into his voice, just exploring some angles regarding potential corporate risks. I'll fill you in when I have more. Elizabeth frowned, stepping closer to his desk. You're hiding something. You barely show up for half the meetings, and now you're meeting privately with Gray. What's going on? An impulse to lie surfaced, but Elizabeth was family. He sighed, lowering his voice. I suspect Catherine might be involved in a situation with Ventex, something that put her in danger. Her eyes widened. Ventex, you mean that shady competitor we've been clashing with on patents for years? He nodded. Yes, she worked for them before I hired her. She might have discovered fraud and refused to stay quiet. Elizabeth sank into a chair. So that's why she disappeared. You think they threatened her? That's the likely scenario, Marcus said grimly, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. Gray is doing some digging. Elizabeth clasped her hands, face taut with worry. If this is true, we need to think about the company's position. Ventex is powerful, with political connections. If we get tangled in a legal battle, it'll be huge. Investors could panic, the merger could be jeopardized. Marcus rubbed his temples. I know, but I can't ignore this. Catherine's in danger. She was silent for a moment, then asked in a quieter tone, Do you still love her? Caught off guard, Marcus paused. I don't know how to answer that. I can't just switch off what I felt for her. But it's not just love, it's responsibility. If we're right, she left to protect me or to protect both of us from retaliation. Elizabeth glanced at the floor, her expression conflicted. I remember how devastated you were when she vanished. If there's a chance to bring her back safely, I won't stand in the way. Marcus reached across the desk, taking her hand briefly. Thank you, he said, voice soft. But let's keep this within our circle until we know more. She nodded. Agreed. Just be careful, Marcus. If Ventex realizes you're onto something, they could retaliate. He watched her leave, thinking about Catherine's quiet determination. She had once fought for honest marketing campaigns at Sterling Innovations, insisting they highlight real social impact rather than puffed-up rhetoric. That same moral conviction likely drove her to expose Ventex. Maybe Catherine had realized, on the eve of their wedding, that staying by Marcus's side would put him under the same threat. Though the pieces of the puzzle were coming together, the biggest question remained unanswered. Where was she now, and why did she still refuse his help? If he could only get her to trust him again, to trust that together they could face whatever danger lurked. But Catherine, as always, had chosen her own path. 3 days later, Marcus was in his office on a rainy afternoon, staring out at the slick city streets below. He felt a rush of anticipation when Rob's name flashed on his phone screen. Answering quickly, he heard Rob speak in hushed tones. We might have something. A woman matching Catherine's description was spotted near a women's clinic on the east side. Word is, she was trying to get medical checkups for her kids, but refused to fill out forms. Marcus's pulse jumped. Is she still there? Doubtful. But if you hurry, the staff might remember her. I'll meet you outside the clinic. He grabbed his coat and practically sprinted to the elevator, ignoring Elizabeth's startled look and the pressing calls from investors. He left the building. In the backseat of a taxi, the city blurred by in streaks of grey and neon. Marcus's thoughts raced, imagining a million possibilities. Maybe Catherine was still at the clinic, or perhaps she'd vanished again. When the taxi pulled up to the modest brick building, Rob was already there, waiting under a dripping awning. He flicked a cigarette onto the wet pavement and walked over. Clinic's about to close, Rob said, glancing at his watch. They slipped inside, greeted by the smell of disinfectant and the low hum of fluorescent lights. A receptionist looked up from behind a desk. We're wrapping up. Can I help you? Rob let Marcus do the talking. He explained they were searching for a woman with 2 young children, both of them possibly ill. He was careful not to mention Catherine by name, in case she had used an alias. The receptionist looked skeptical. We don't hand out patient information freely. Marcus clenched his jaw, feeling the urge to flash his wealth or power, but he remembered Catherine's distrust and decided to appeal to compassion instead. She's someone I care about deeply. I believe she might be in danger. After a tense moment, the receptionist sighed. Hang on. She disappeared down a hallway and returned with a nurse, a petite woman with cropped blonde hair named Angela. Wiping her hands on a paper towel, Angela asked a few questions, then nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I remember a woman who came in with 2 kids about that age. She wouldn't give us her name, just said the children had persistent coughs. We wanted to run tests, but she refused, looked paranoid. I tried to persuade her to stay, but she grabbed the kids and left. Marcus felt a wave of relief and frustration. Which way did she go? Angela shrugged. Out the side entrance. I asked if she had insurance or any contact number, but she seemed scared, kept looking over her shoulder. Rob interjected. Did she say anything about returning or mention where she was staying? Angela shook her head. She mentioned needing medicine, but that's it. I offered to help her apply for some assistance program. She practically bolted. Marcus exchanged a glance with Rob. This was the first real trace they'd had of Catherine in days. Yet it felt like she was always one step ahead, maintaining her flight, refusing to register in any system. They thanked Angela and the receptionist, leaving the clinic just as the staff began locking up. Outside, the rain had let up, leaving a misty sheen on the pavement. Marcus felt a surge of frustration. They were so close. She was here, but why keep running? Rob lit another cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke. She's actively avoiding getting pinned down. The question is, who does she think might be tracking her? Just Ventex, or is there someone else? Marcus shook his head. I don't know. Maybe she's afraid the system itself will trace her and deliver her back to whoever threatened her. Or maybe she thinks I'm involved somehow. You think she'd suspect you? Rob asked, eyes narrowing. Marcus shrugged, his shoulders heavy with concern. I've tried to contact her, but she runs every time she sees me. If she left me without a word before, maybe she assumed I'd side with corporate interests over her safety. Rob studied Marcus's expression. Then we need a different approach. We can't corner her. It'll only make her vanish again. He paused, flicking ash from his cigarette. We might consider planting someone she doesn't recognize, someone who can gain her trust from the ground up. Marcus mulled over the idea. It felt manipulative, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Jenny might help us with that. She knows the ins and outs of social services. If Catherine shows up at a soup kitchen again, or if her kids need medical attention, Jenny could intervene gently. Rob nodded, stepping aside as a cluster of pedestrians passed them on the sidewalk. It's worth a shot, but be prepared. If Catherine's truly terrified, no amount of gentle persuasion may work right away. The rain started up again, a light drizzle. Marcus tightened his coat around him. He remembered Catherine's eyes the night he found her, the raw fear mixed with a hint of recognition. Something big and dangerous was chasing her. He could feel it, and though they had found a clue today, he sensed a confrontation on the horizon, one that might involve forces beyond his control. Climbing into a waiting cab, Marcus gazed out at the clinic's doors. Catherine had been there mere hours before, protecting her children with every ounce of strength she had left. If only she knew that he would do anything, everything, to protect them too. Marcus woke early on a Monday morning, the sky still painted with faint streaks of dawn. His penthouse felt emptier by the day, every polished surface reflecting his mounting anxiety. He dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a simple button-down, then made his way to a small cafe in the East Village, where he and Rob Halifax had agreed to meet before the city fully stirred. Rob arrived first, seated at a corner table nursing a strong coffee. The scent of fresh pastries hung in the air, a small comfort in the midst of their ongoing search. Marcus slid into the chair across from him, noticing the dark circles under Rob's eyes. Long night, Marcus asked. Rob grimaced. I spent half of it sifting through old Ventex documents leaked to a whistleblower group years ago. Nothing directly names Catherine, but I see patterns. money funneled into dummy accounts, philanthropic funds mislabeled and misused. It's the kind of scheme that could scare people into silence. Marcus nodded, an uneasy knot in his stomach. He could almost picture Catherine stumbling onto something bigger than she could handle, then realizing the danger too late. "Any luck finding out if Ventex is actively searching for her?" he asked quietly. "Hard to say," Rob replied, tapping the rim of his cup. "Officially, Ventex denies any wrongdoing, but you know how these things go. They could have private investigators or worse looking for her. If she still has evidence, they'll want it buried for good." Marcus stared out the window at the early morning commuters. "We can't let them corner her," he said, voice tight. "I've got Gray digging into legal angles, but without Catherine's testimony, we can't expose them." "We need to protect her first." Rob set down his coffee. "I'm making headway in the shelters. People trust me more than a corporate suit. No offense," he added with a quick grin. "Word is, Catherine's kids have had recurring colds or maybe mild asthma. A few folks recall a worried mother searching for medical help but refusing to register. If you ask me, it's only a matter of time before they need proper care. That's our window." Marcus grimaced. "I hate waiting for them to get so sick they have no choice but to seek help." Rob reached across the table. "I know, but she's running scared. Forcing contact might spook her again." Just then, Marcus's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Jenny Matthews from the community center. He stepped outside to answer in the crisp morning air. "Marcus, it's Jenny," she began. "A woman matching Catherine's description was seen at one of our mobile outreach vans last night. She didn't give her name, but the volunteer recognized her from the photo I had. She left in a hurry again, but the volunteer managed to give her a flyer for a free children's health clinic this weekend." Marcus's pulse quickened. "That's great news. Which clinic?" Jenny gave him the address of a church basement on the Lower East Side. "It's a once-a-month event, offering basic checkups, free antibiotics, and so on. If her kids are under the weather, there's a decent chance she'll show up." He felt a spark of hope. "Thank you, Jenny. I'll be there." Ending the call, he returned to Rob, who raised an eyebrow at Marcus's sudden smile. Marcus explained the lead, feeling his chest lighten despite the undercurrent of dread. "If she's that desperate for the kids' health, she might risk it," Rob agreed. "We'll prepare carefully." Still, an uneasy sensation tugged at Marcus. Every step closer to Catherine meant a bigger target on her back if Ventex caught wind of their efforts, but the alternative, to do nothing, was unthinkable. He paid for their coffees, and they emerged onto the busy street, the morning sun finally climbing above the skyline. Before they parted ways, Marcus hesitated. "I have a feeling something big is about to happen. Keep digging, but watch your back," he said, his tone grim. Rob gave a curt nod. "Same goes for you. You're the CEO of a competing firm. If Ventex sees you poking around, they might retaliate." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Let them try. I won't back down." With that, they went their separate ways, each carrying the weight of a growing conspiracy that threatened to erupt. Marcus thought of Catherine constantly, picturing her exhausted face as she clung to two frightened children. Whatever it took, he would be at that clinic, ready to help, if she would only let him. Yet beneath his determination lay a quiet fear that Catherine might vanish again if she sensed danger, or worse, that danger might find her first. The tension gnawed at him, driving him onward in a quest that became more urgent with each passing day. The remainder of the week passed in a haze of corporate demands and covert investigations. By Friday afternoon, Sterling Innovations was abuzz with board members expecting an update on the near-final merger negotiations. Marcus trudged into the glass-walled conference room with heavy shoulders, his mind only half on business. Elizabeth sat to his right, scanning documents. Across the table, Nolan Burke and two other executives waited impatiently. "We need your signature to move forward," Nolan said brusquely. "Is everything in order?" Marcus flipped through the final contract, the lines of legal jargon blurring before his eyes. He forced himself to focus. "I've reviewed the clauses regarding employee retention, intellectual property. It all seems acceptable." Burke's eyes narrowed. "So you'll sign?" A wave of doubt washed over Marcus. He knew that completing this merger would cement Sterling Innovations as a tech titan, but it also meant his attention would be split when Catherine might need him most. "I'd like to revisit certain indemnity clauses," he said, stalling. Nolan gritted his teeth. "Marcus, we've been over those clauses 100 times. The other party is waiting. This is a huge opportunity. Don't sabotage it." Elizabeth shot Marcus a worried glance. She knew something weighed on him, but in front of the others, she kept her composure. "Marcus, if there's an issue, let's address it briefly. We don't want to appear disorganized." He sighed, willing himself to remain calm. "Give me until the end of the day." "I'll sign then." Grumbling, Nolan nodded. The tension in the room was palpable as the meeting concluded. While the board members filed out, Elizabeth lingered. She closed the door gently behind them. "What's going on?" she asked in a hushed tone. "You're stalling." He rubbed his forehead. "I'm worried if I tie up too many resources in the merger, I'll be stretched thin dealing with Catherine's situation, but I also can't let the merger collapse. Thousands of jobs depend on it." Elizabeth placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to do everything alone. Delegate. If you want to move forward with the merger, trust your team. As for Catherine, just keep me in the loop. I'll do what I can on the corporate side." Marcus thanked her, feeling a pang of gratitude. For all their disagreements, Elizabeth was family, someone who, despite her pragmatic concerns, truly cared about his well-being. Later that evening, he returned to his office and found himself staring at a photo on his desk, one of the few he had of Catherine from years ago. She wore a smart blazer, her dark hair styled neatly, a confident smile curving her lips. The memory stung, how her eyes would light up discussing philanthropic initiatives and marketing strategies that actually made a difference. He flipped open his laptop. An email from Rob awaited him with additional Ventex documents attached. Something caught his eye, a reference to hush money paid out to an unidentified party around the time Catherine vanished. The sum was substantial. A line item read, "Special disbursement, account Dashan, redacted." Could Catherine have been offered this money to keep silent? Or was it connected to the threat that forced her underground? Marcus tapped his fingers nervously on the desk. He copied the files to a secure drive, then forwarded them to Robert Gray, adding a brief note. "Urgent, please advise on next steps." The phone rang. It was Gray. "Marcus, I'm looking at these documents. They're damning, if legitimate. But we need Catherine's testimony, or it's all circumstantial. You must locate her and convince her to talk." Marcus's throat felt tight. "I'm doing all I can. She's terrified. If we push too hard, she'll run." Gray sighed. "Time is not on our side. If Ventex or others sense we're amassing evidence, they might go after her more aggressively. Keep your guard up and hire extra security if you need to." He hung up, the weight of Gray's warning pressing down on him. Marcus had been so focused on finding Catherine that he'd hardly considered the possibility of Ventex striking first. What if they found her before he did? The thought made him shudder. Staring once more at Catherine's old photo, he recalled her laugh, the way she'd reassure him during his darkest moments, her confidence unwavering. Now it was his turn to offer reassurance, if he could only reach her in time. He closed his eyes, hoping that the approaching weekend and the children's health clinic would present the breakthrough he so desperately needed. Saturday morning arrived thick with a damp fog that clung to the Lower East Side. Marcus parked his car on a side street and checked his watch. The children's health clinic would be opening soon in the basement of a weathered brick church. He stood on the sidewalk, searching for any sign of Catherine. Rob joined him, slipping through a small crowd that hovered near the church doors. The tension in Marcus's chest grew every time a mother with kids appeared. He scanned faces, hearts pounding at every glimpse of dark hair. They eased their way inside, where volunteers prepared tables, medical supplies, and pamphlets. The space smelled of disinfectant and instant coffee. Painted cinder block walls gave the place a stark, functional feel. Families began filing in, some with strollers, others carrying toddlers. A few recognized Marcus from the soup kitchen and greeted him politely. Jenny Matthews appeared, wearing a faded denim jacket and sneakers. She offered a quick hug of encouragement to Marcus. "I've stationed a few volunteers by the entrance. If Catherine shows, we'll spot her." Marcus nodded, feeling strangely like he was on a stakeout. He didn't like the idea of ambushing Catherine, but this might be the only chance to see her before she slipped away again. He strolled through the makeshift clinic, noticing volunteer doctors at folding tables, screening children for fevers and coughs. Occasionally, he'd glance toward the door, but there was no sign of Catherine. Time crawled. More families filtered in, many looking exhausted. Still, Catherine and her children were nowhere to be found. Rob kept scanning the crowd, and Jenny tried to stay upbeat, but Marcus felt an ache of disappointment. Maybe Catherine suspected a trap. Maybe she'd opted for a different clinic. Or maybe the children's illnesses weren't severe enough to warrant immediate treatment. After a couple of hours, Marcus stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. He leaned against the church's stone wall, eyes shut, grappling with the reality that he might have to wait even longer. He felt a tap on his shoulder. One of the volunteers, a young woman named Tasha, looking excited and worried at once. "Mr. Sterling, I think she's here." His heart lurched. "Where?" Tasha pointed to a corner near the back of the basement. "She came in quietly a few minutes ago, hood up, trying not to be seen. She has 2 kids with her, both coughing." Marcus rushed back in, spotting a slight figure with worn sneakers and a tattered hoodie standing at the edge of the clinic near a bulletin board. 2 small children clung to her legs. Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears. That had to be Catherine. He moved closer, trying to appear calm. When he was a few feet away, the woman turned slightly, enough for him to see her face, Catherine looking hollow-cheeked and tense. She froze, her gaze darting around as if seeking an escape route. "Catherine," he said softly, "please, don't run. Let them help the kids." She stiffened, eyes blazing with a mix of fear and anger. "Marcus," she whispered, the name sounding like both an accusation and a plea. The children coughed, drawing the attention of a volunteer doctor who approached with a gentle smile. "Do you want me to take a look at them?" Catherine hesitated, torn between her protective instinct and the kid's obvious need for care. Marcus stepped back slightly, giving her space. "I won't force anything, but they're not well. Let the doctor check them out." Catherine nodded once, reluctantly allowing the volunteer doctor to lead the children to a small folding table. Marcus noticed the trembling in her hands. He tried to offer a reassuring look, but she couldn't meet his eyes. Rob hovered nearby, ready to intervene if Catherine panicked. Marcus gestured for him to keep some distance. This was her moment, her decision. After a tense few minutes, the doctor completed a brief examination, suggesting antibiotics for both kids and a more thorough workup at a nearby clinic if possible. Catherine thanked the doctor quietly, clutching the prescriptions like a lifeline. When the doctor left, Catherine shot Marcus a wary glance. "You shouldn't be here." His chest tightened. "I had to find you. I've been worried about you, about the kids. Are you safe?" She shook her head, lips pressing tight as if holding back tears. "There's no safe for us, Marcus. Go away." His voice cracked. "I can't. Not after seeing you like this." A flicker of emotion crossed her face, anger or sorrow. He couldn't tell which. One of the children tugged at her sleeve, coughing again, reminding her of the fragile line she was walking. She seized that moment, guiding both kids by the hand. "I have to go," she said, glancing around for an exit. Marcus fought the urge to beg her to stay. Instead, he spoke with quiet desperation. "I won't chase you, Catherine, but please, call me. If you ever need anything, even just a place to sleep." He dug a card from his wallet, holding it out. "This is my direct line." Her eyes flicked to the card, then back to him. For a heartbeat, he thought she might take it, but she shook her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and turned away, disappearing into the crowd. By the time he reached the door, she was gone, leaving him stunned and heartsick, yet more determined than ever to protect her from the dark forces he sensed closing in. Minutes after Catherine vanished from the church basement, Marcus stood outside with Rob and Jenny, frustration etched on his face. A light drizzle had begun, mirroring the heaviness of his mood. "She was right there," he muttered, voice raw, "and she just slipped away again." Rob placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "At least the kids got a quick checkup. That's something." Jenny nodded. "And maybe now she knows this clinic is safe. If her children need more care, she might come back, or she could reach out to me or another volunteer. We'll keep an eye out." They parted ways, leaving Marcus feeling both relieved that he'd actually spoken to Catherine and tormented that she still distrusted him. He made his way back to his car, playing the conversation over in his head. He recalled the haunted look in her eyes, the trembling in her voice. Whatever threatened her must be looming closer than ever. That night, he could hardly sleep. His mind replayed memories of happier times, Catherine laughing in a sunlit cafe, brainstorming marketing ideas that would connect with people's hearts. He remembered how she defended a small charity in one of their campaigns, refusing to gloss over the rough realities because she believed in honest storytelling. In the morning, Marcus rose early and drove to the outskirts of Manhattan, where he and Catherine once rented a cottage for quiet weekends away from the city. The property belonged to an old friend of his father's, and though it wasn't large or luxurious, it held a special place in Marcus's heart. The cottage stood near a small lake, with tall maples lining a gravel road. It had fallen into disuse over the years, the owner letting it languish as city life beckoned. Stepping onto the creaking porch, Marcus unlocked the door and entered. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, seeping through the windows. Everything was still, as if waiting for life to resume. He walked through the modest living room, his footsteps echoing. Memories of Catherine flashed before him, reading beside the fireplace, testing recipes in the tiny kitchen, or watching the sunset over the lake. They had dreams of buying the place after the wedding, fixing it up, maybe raising a family here on weekends. He let out a shaky breath, wiping a thin layer of dust from a mantel where a forgotten vase stood. "I could bring her here," he whispered to himself. If Catherine ever agreed to trust him, this secluded spot might be a haven far from Ventex's reach. A place for her and the kids to heal, to feel safe. Driving back into the city, Marcus called Rob with a plan. "We need a safe house. I have a place outside Manhattan that could work. If Catherine contacts us, we can bring her there." Rob agreed to keep the location discreet, acknowledging that secrecy was paramount. As Marcus ended the call, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was Robert Gray. "I've been poring over more Ventex records," Gray said, his voice urgent. I found references to a Walsh settlement in internal memos. Dates align almost perfectly with Catherine's disappearance. I suspect hush money or intimidation was involved. Marcus frowned. Any evidence that they're actively hunting her now? Not explicit, but some communications reference loose ends that need to be handled. This is all coded and vague, but it's enough to be suspicious. Fear coiled in Marcus's gut. We have to accelerate. If they realize Catherine is still in the city, they might close in fast. Gray agreed, warning Marcus to stay vigilant. Ending the call, Marcus felt the full gravity of the situation crushing him. Catherine had once been on the verge of blowing open a major scandal. Instead, she vanished without a trace. Now it seemed Ventex's reach was deeper than he'd imagined. That evening, he walked through the opulent lobby of Sterling Innovations. Passing employees who gave polite nods, he retreated to his office, not bothering to turn on the overhead lights, preferring the dim glow from the city skyline. In the darkness, he studied old photos of Catherine he'd saved on his phone, a few text messages she had sent him just days before disappearing. Each message felt like a clue he'd missed, a warning he hadn't understood in time. He couldn't shake the memory of her trembling voice at the clinic. "There's no safe for us." Maybe she believed that any association with him would put both him and the children in harm's way. Maybe she still cared enough to keep her distance. But if Ventex was behind this, and if they learned Catherine was close by, her safety would be precarious at best. Marcus had to find a way to break through her fear, to show her that not only did he have the will to protect her, but he also had the resources and moral imperative to expose the truth. By midweek, news of Ventex's troubled financial records began to circulate quietly in certain business circles. Whispers of internal audits and possible legal scrutiny grew louder. Marcus heard the murmurings from a few of his own board members, who were concerned that a corporate scandal involving a competitor might cast a shadow on Sterling Innovations as well. He knew he had to prepare for a more public confrontation. If Ventex was cornered, they might lash out aggressively. Catherine's life and the lives of her children could be in even greater peril. One afternoon, Elizabeth appeared at his office with an uneasy expression. "Nolan Burke just told me he heard Ventex's CEO is furious about some documents being leaked. Did you or Rob have anything to do with that?" Marcus hesitated. "Rob's been digging, but I don't think he's directly leaked anything. Some whistleblower groups might be pushing the story now that Ventex is under suspicion." Elizabeth looked unconvinced, but sighed. "Either way, we need to brace for impact. If Ventex goes down, the market could shift dramatically. Investors will look to us for stability. You have to be ready." Marcus nodded, though his thoughts drifted back to Catherine, who remained elusive. "I'll handle it," he assured her, trying to project confidence. "But there's more to this than just business, Liz." She softened. "I know. I'm worried about Catherine, too. And you. Just be careful." Shortly after Elizabeth left, Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Jenny. "A woman with kids approached me at the community center. Not sure it's Catherine, but I have a strong feeling. Come ASAP." Marcus bolted from his office, not even bothering to grab his jacket. The drive to Hearts United Community Center felt endless, and traffic forced him to weave impatiently through the streets. By the time he arrived, sweaty and breathless, Jenny was waiting by the entrance. "She was here," Jenny said, ushering Marcus into a quiet corner of the lobby. "I saw her, dark hair, gaunt face. The children looked the same age as you described. She asked if there was any free pediatric care tonight. When I stepped away to find some brochures, she slipped out." Marcus's shoulders sagged. "Gone again." Jenny touched his arm. "I chased after her. I caught up with her a block away, but she told me she needed to keep moving. She wouldn't say why. She did ask If you'd been around, Marcus blinked in surprise. She asked about me. Jenny smiled gently. Yes, when I mentioned you'd been volunteering, she got this look, scared, but also sad. I told her you only want to help. She wouldn't talk more, but at least she's asking questions, right? A fragile hope sparked in Marcus. Maybe she's beginning to trust me again, even if just a little. Before he left, Jenny handed him a worn piece of paper. She dropped this when she ran off. I tried to give it back, but she was gone. Marcus unfolded it. It was a ripped page from a children's activity book with a simple drawing of a house, crayon scrawls that might have been the work of a young child. In one corner, there was a shaky outline of 3 stick figures, 2 small, 1 bigger, presumably Catherine and the twins. Off to the side, another figure stood alone, question marks above its head. Marcus's throat tightened. The childlike depiction seemed to capture Catherine's dilemma, to let Marcus in or keep him at a distance. That must be one of the kids' drawings, Jenny said softly. It's like they're wondering about that person in the corner. Marcus stared at it, a swirl of emotions churning inside him. We're so close. She's torn. I can feel it. Over the next few days, the tension only escalated. Rob discovered that several Ventex executives had recently hired private security firms, presumably bracing for legal or media fallout. Another rumor hinted that a key witness might be out there, someone with enough proof to bury the company. All signs pointed to Catherine. One evening, Marcus and Rob convened in a dark booth at a quiet bar off Lexington Avenue. The place was nearly empty, the low hum of jazz music playing overhead. They discussed the next steps in hushed tones, mindful of prying ears. Whether she likes it or not, Catherine's in the eye of a coming storm, Rob said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. We need a solid plan for if or when she contacts you. Marcus agreed. Gray's drawing up a protective order. If Catherine can testify against Ventex, we'll push for immunity and witness protection, but she needs to come forward willingly. Rob nodded. And soon. Because if Ventex finds her first, who knows what they'll do? Marcus gazed at the drawing he'd folded and kept in his wallet. The lonely figure at the edge seemed to stare back at him. I have to make her see she's not alone. If she's trying to shield me, I have to show her I can stand by her side, whatever the cost. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of impending conflict pressing down. The time for small steps and half measures was nearing its end. The truth would have to emerge, and with it, the reckoning they all dreaded. Deep down, Marcus felt a growing resolve. He had spent years haunted by Catherine's disappearance, overshadowed by guilt and unanswered questions. Now, it seemed the final act of this long, painful saga was drawing near. If they managed to find Catherine before Ventex's forces closed in, he might secure not only her safety, but also a measure of justice for all she had lost. Yet behind that determination lay a flicker of dread. If Catherine still believed there was no safe haven in the world, how far would she go to keep running? And how many dangers would close in before Marcus could show her that this time she had someone to trust? Marcus stood on the balcony of his penthouse, staring at the Manhattan skyline that glimmered like a promise or a threat. News reports had begun to swirl with whispers of mounting allegations against Ventex Solutions. Although the media still lacked concrete evidence, industry insiders were already speculating about corruption, illegal financial dealings, and the likelihood that a key witness might be out there. Marcus felt each rumor as a personal reminder that Catherine was at the heart of this whirlwind. Early that morning, Rob Halifax had called, his voice clipped and urgent. We need to talk, face to face. There's new intel about Ventex stepping up their efforts to locate someone, most likely Catherine. Marcus agreed to meet at a discreet cafe near Central Park, a small place that served artisan pastries and kept a low profile. When he arrived, Rob was already seated at a corner table, scanning the room with the wary gaze of a long-time investigator. "Sorry to drag you here before sunrise," Rob said, pushing a cup of black coffee toward Marcus. "But I got a tip from one of my contacts, a security firm that Ventex occasionally uses. Word is, Ventex is panicking. They suspect Catherine's alive, in New York, and ready to blow the whistle." Marcus's gut tightened. He took a sip of coffee, but barely tasted it. "What are they planning?" Rob shrugged grimly. "Nothing good. Could be they just want to pay her off again. But if she refuses, I wouldn't rule out more drastic measures. Corporations facing massive financial scandal often go to extremes." Marcus leaned forward, voice low. "They're playing with fire. If they harm Catherine, it won't silence the scandal. It'll ignite a bigger one." Rob nodded, tapping a folder on the table. "They don't think that far ahead. Fear drives them now. My contact overheard talk of private detectives doubling their patrols in areas with high homeless populations. They're practically hunting her." Marcus drew a sharp breath, glancing around the cafe as though Ventex agents might be lurking in every corner. "We have to warn her somehow, but she's already so skittish she won't even take my phone number." Rob closed his eyes briefly. "Let's coordinate with Jenny. If Catherine shows up at Hearts United or any other shelter, we'll have to intervene immediately. We need to get her out of the city or into a safe location before Ventex closes in." Marcus recalled the dusty lake cottage outside Manhattan. A surge of determination ran through him. "I know a place where she could hide, at least temporarily. But I have to convince her to trust me first." Rob gestured at the window, where the early morning sun was beginning to warm the streets. "Marcus, there's another angle. We can't just protect Catherine if she's the key witness. We need her testimony. Otherwise, Ventex weasels out of any real punishment. Gray can only do so much with circumstantial evidence." Marcus thought of Catherine's trembling voice at the clinic, the fear in her eyes. He imagined the guilt and responsibility she must carry. "I won't push her to talk until she's safe," he said slowly. "I owe her that much. But if she's willing, we can blow this scandal wide open. I'd do whatever it takes to keep her and her children shielded from retaliation." They finished their coffees in tense silence. Marcus felt the weight of the coming confrontation, like a dark cloud hovering just beyond the horizon. He pictured Catherine on some street corner, keeping her children close, scanning every passerby for threats. With Ventex accelerating their hunt, the timeline shrank. Not long after, Marcus slipped out of the cafe and headed to Sterling Innovations. He had to maintain a semblance of normalcy, at least on the surface, sign some papers, meet with the board, pretend he wasn't consumed by the urgency of saving the woman he loved. But as he traversed the halls of his sleek corporate tower, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. A short while later, Elizabeth found him in his office, reading through a new batch of Ventex-related documents. She studied the anxious lines on his face, then shut the door. "Marcus, the board wants an update on the merger. They're insisting on your presence at a final review session in 2 days. It's mandatory." He set aside the papers. "I'll be there." She narrowed her eyes, detecting his distraction. "This is serious, big brother. You can't just show up in body while your mind is elsewhere." Marcus managed a wry smile. "I'm juggling a lot, Liz, but I understand my responsibilities." Her expression softened. "I know Catherine means everything to you. Just remember, if you lose control of the company, you'll have fewer resources to protect her." He exhaled slowly, appreciating the truth in her words. "I'm aware. I'll handle it." She nodded, leaving him alone. He looked down at the half-read documents about Ventex's alleged hush funds, thinking about how a single piece of paper could destroy or save a life. If he succeeded in finding Catherine, that confrontation with Ventex would be inevitable. A storm that threatened to sweep away reputations, fortunes, and maybe even their lives. The question was not whether the storm would break, but when. And standing on the precipice, Marcus wondered if he could truly shield Catherine from the fallout, or if, once again, she'd be forced to run. 2 days later, the Sterling Innovations Board meeting droned on in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown. Marcus sat at the head of the table, flanked by Elizabeth on one side and Nolan Burke on the other. The final merger review was a formality, but it had turned into a tense affair after rumors about Ventex's implosion began surfacing in the press. Nolan finished rattling off sales projections and corporate synergy pitches. He pressed a stack of documents in front of Marcus. "We just need your signature. After this, we go public with the announcement on Monday. The market is expecting it." Marcus eyed the papers. Normally, this deal would excite him, but his mind flicked to Catherine's face. He thought about Ventex's tightening net and how little time she might have left. Still, he had to act the part of CEO. Elizabeth cleared her throat. "Marcus, if there aren't any last-minute changes, we should finalize this before the news leaks. Investors want stability." Marcus braced himself, pen hovering. He caught the anxious look in Elizabeth's eyes. She was silently urging him not to falter. With a flourish, he signed the documents. The moment he set down the pen, a sense of unreality enveloped him. On paper, he'd just secured Sterling Innovations' future, but in his heart, he felt only the mounting pressure to find Catherine. A round of polite applause followed, though Nolan's expression suggested he was still watchful of Marcus's commitment. After the meeting, Elizabeth grabbed Marcus's arm. "Congrats, but I know you're worried. Let's get through the press conference Monday, and then you can focus on everything else." Marcus nodded, forcing a tight smile. "Thanks. I'll keep it together." A sudden vibration in his suit pocket made him tense. Fishing out his phone, he saw a text from Rob. "Possible sighting near 12th and Broadway. Looks urgent." "I'm on my way." Without a word, Marcus slipped out of the conference room. He hurried to the elevator, ignoring the curious glances of employees. Once on the street, he flagged a cab, heart thudding. If this was yet another near miss, it would feel like running on a treadmill with no end in sight. But if Catherine was there, now, he had no intention of letting her vanish again. The taxi zigzagged through traffic, eventually stopping a block away from the indicated address, a rundown commercial building with a smattering of small shops below and apartments above. Rob stood on the sidewalk, talking to a man in stained work clothes. When he spotted Marcus, he gestured him over. "Guy here says he saw a woman with 2 kids in the alley behind the building," Rob explained, stepping aside so the man could speak. "She was looking for a friend who lives in one of the upstairs rooms," the man said, scratching his beard. "Seemed nervous. The kids were coughing something fierce." Marcus's heart lurched. "What apartment?" The man shrugged. "Not sure. She asked for a name, Samantha, I think, but that gal's not here anymore. Moved out last month." "Which way did she go?" He pointed further down the alley. "Left in a hurry when I told her Samantha was gone." Marcus didn't wait for more. He and Rob headed into the narrow alley, the concrete walls rising on either side. Garbage bins sat at irregular intervals, and a faint stench lingered in the humid air. They reached the end of the alley, scanning for any sign of Catherine. Nothing but a chain-link fence, partially open. Beyond the fence lay a cramped courtyard behind an old bakery. Marcus's pulse pounded as they picked their way through discarded pallets and broken chairs. Finally, they emerged onto a side street. Deserted. Rob cursed softly under his breath. "Must have been her. We're too late." Marcus looked around frantically, trying to imagine which direction Catherine might have taken. A surge of desperation gripped him. They had come so close, but she was like a phantom, slipping away whenever he drew near. Rob put a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We'll find her. She's making more appearances, which means she's desperate. She might run out of options soon." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. "I just can't shake the feeling that Ventex is on the same trail." They walked back toward the main street, heads bowed in defeat. Marcus felt a hollowness in his chest. If Catherine was visiting old acquaintances, she might be searching for a safe haven, or maybe money, or even a place to hide the kids. But every minute they spent chasing shadows was a minute Ventex could be closing in. As they reached the sidewalk, Marcus's phone pinged again, this time a voicemail from Robert Gray. Marcus listened, dread gathering like storm clouds. Gray's voice sounded urgent, indicating new developments on Ventex's legal front and urging Marcus to call back immediately. He ended the call and looked at Rob, jaw set. "I have to handle something. Keep searching these blocks. Ask store owners or neighbors if they saw Catherine. I'll join you as soon as I can." Rob nodded, turning away to begin the hunt anew. Marcus watched him go, filled with a nauseating mix of hope and fear. They were in the final stretch, the tension building like a drawn bow. Any moment now, the arrow could fly, and the consequences would be irrevocable. Later that same day, Marcus hurried to Robert Gray's law office, a stately building in Midtown with polished marble floors and sweeping staircases. He found Gray in a private conference room, poring over stacks of documents. The lawyer beckoned him in, face drawn. "Marcus, come in. I've discovered more details on Ventex's hush payments," Gray said, motioning for him to sit. "Their accounts payable records show a pattern of transactions to shell companies right around the time Catherine vanished. If Catherine was the intended recipient or the reason for these payouts, it looks like bribery or blackmail." Marcus's throat tightened. "You think they threatened her, then offered money if she'd disappear?" Gray nodded grimly. "Possibly. Or they threatened someone close to her. Either way, if she resurfaces to testify, Ventex's leadership could be indicted for fraud, conspiracy, maybe even more." Marcus looked down at his clasped hands. "We're racing the clock. Ventex won't wait for the law to catch up. They might take matters into their own hands." Gray tapped the folder. "I've filed a preliminary notice with the state attorney's office. If Catherine appears and gives a sworn statement, we can request protective custody. But we need her cooperation. That means you have to convince her to come in willingly." Marcus exhaled slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes, but I can't even get her to meet my eyes long enough to explain. She thinks nowhere is safe." Gray leaned in, tone gentle. "She's not entirely wrong, Marcus. This is a high-stakes game, and Ventex is desperate. But if we do nothing, they'll remain free to hunt her. She'll never truly be safe. The only path forward is bringing everything into the light." Marcus recognized the truth in Gray's words. Catherine was in a perpetual cycle of running, no security, no future. She deserved a real shot at reclaiming her life. With a nod, he stood. "I'll find her. When I do, we'll need to move quickly." "Have everything ready." He left Gray's office, mind churning with fears of what might happen if he was too slow. Even with the new evidence, the actual confrontation with Ventex was looming. He needed Catherine's trust, something that seemed more elusive with every step she took away from him. Late that evening, he rejoined Rob on the Lower East Side. They hit the streets, each man showing Catherine's old photo around discreetly. A few people recognized her from the soup kitchen or a shelter, but no one knew where she'd gone. By midnight, exhaustion weighed on them both, yet Marcus refused to quit. They ended up at Hearts United Community Center, where Jenny Matthews was sorting donated blankets in a back room. She glanced up as they entered, noticing the strain on Marcus's face. Without a word, she handed him a mug of herbal tea. "She was seen near 12th and Broadway," he explained, his voice raw. But we lost her again. Jenny's eyes glimmered with sympathy. I'm sure you're doing all you can. Marcus sipped the tea, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. I just keep thinking about how afraid she is, and what it will take for her to finally let me help. Jenny placed a comforting hand on his arm. Sometimes it takes a crisis, something that forces a person to realize they can't do it alone. Rob leaned against a metal shelf, arms crossed. Given Ventex's moves, I'm afraid that crisis is coming sooner than we'd like. They conversed in hushed tones until the early hours, strategizing how to cover more ground. Jenny would ask more local volunteers to keep watch for Catherine, focusing on areas where mothers with kids might seek refuge, certain subway stops, late-night food lines, and clinics. Marcus volunteered to supply resources for more frequent street patrols, mobile units offering blankets, snacks, and first aid supplies. Before leaving, Marcus paused by the community center's exit. The hallway was lined with art from children who visited, crayon drawings of families, suns and rainbows. Each image, no matter how simple, radiated the hope that children carry. He thought of Catherine's little ones, wandering uncertain streets instead of sleeping in a warm bed. The weight of it nearly crushed him. As he stepped into the chilly night, a part of him braced for the moment everything might unravel. The confrontation with Ventex felt inevitable, perhaps even imminent. All he could do was push forward, guided by the faint flicker of faith that Catherine would realize she wasn't alone, that someone still cared enough to fight by her side. He glanced up at the starlit sky, a rare sight through Manhattan's glare, and silently promised her, wherever she was, that he would not give up. In the distance, the city glowed with millions of lights, each telling its own story. He prayed that Catherine's story would not end in tragedy, not if he could help it. Marcus woke the next morning to his phone ringing incessantly. His mind, groggy from too little sleep, took a moment to register the caller ID, Robert Gray. He sat up in bed, heart pounding, and answered, bracing for news. "Marcus," Gray said, voice tense. "I just received a tip from a legal contact. Ventex might have located Catherine, or at least believes they have. They're deploying private security to a block near Chinatown." Marcus's blood ran cold. "How reliable is this tip?" "Very. They wouldn't mobilize that way unless they had a strong lead." Gray paused. "If Catherine's there, she's in serious danger." Marcus scrambled out of bed, throwing on clothes while juggling the phone. "I'll go," he said, adrenaline surging. "Can you alert the police?" Gray sighed. Without a definitive address or a known threat, the NYPD might not respond quickly. Just be careful. Hanging up, Marcus bolted for the door. Within minutes, he'd hailed a cab and was hurtling downtown. A brief text to Rob brought a quick reply. "On my way." The possibility that Ventex was about to corner Catherine made Marcus's hands tremble. She might have nowhere left to run. He arrived at a narrow street in Chinatown, where a row of small shops and cramped apartments lined both sides. Steam drifted up from a sidewalk vendor's dumpling stand, mingling with the chatter of morning customers. Marcus scanned the area, searching for any sign of suspicious men or black SUVs. Anything that might indicate Ventex's hired muscle. His pulse thudded in his ears. Rob appeared moments later, ducking into an alley. Marcus followed, ignoring the curious stares of bystanders. "Any updates?" Marcus asked, voice low. Rob shook his head. "Nothing yet. Let's split up. I'll ask around the shops. You check the side streets and talk to store owners. Maybe someone saw Catherine, or maybe they noticed outsiders snooping around." Marcus agreed, tension coiling in his stomach. He moved from door to door, a corner bakery, a tiny grocery, a herbal medicine shop, flashing Catherine's photo and asking if anyone recognized her. Shopkeepers shook their heads, some politely, others impatiently. A few asked for more details, but none confirmed seeing her. He turned a corner onto a side street filled with fruit stalls and small restaurants. Turning to a middle-aged woman selling vegetables, he held up the picture. "I'm looking for this woman. She might be with 2 children. Have you seen anyone like this?" The vendor frowned thoughtfully. "A lot of people come by. Maybe last night. A lady with kids asked me if she could sleep behind my stall. She looked desperate. I told her no. Sorry, business is business." Marcus's heart seized. "Do you remember which direction she went afterward?" The vendor pointed down the street. "She walked that way, towards some empty buildings." Marcus thanked her and rushed off. The path led to a cluster of old apartments, some with broken windows. Faded signs warned of trespassing. The place looked forgotten by time, an ideal hideout for someone on the run. Marcus approached cautiously, a chill creeping up his spine. Movement caught his eye near a side entrance. A figure in a dark suit, standing guard, nearly hidden in the shadow of a doorframe. Marcus ducked behind a parked car, heart hammering. That man didn't look like a resident or a handyman. More likely, he was Ventex's security. Marcus texted Rob his location. Almost immediately, Rob responded, "Close by, hold tight." Marcus glanced around, half expecting to see more men stationed like sentries. If Catherine had taken refuge inside, she was trapped. He spotted a narrow alley running alongside the building. Slipping down it, he found a rusted fire escape leading to the second floor. He heard footsteps behind him, Rob, moving quietly. Marcus gestured to the fire escape. Rob nodded, indicating they should climb, step by careful step. They ascended, trying not to rattle the iron staircase. At the second-story landing, a window was cracked open. Marcus peeked inside, a dim corridor littered with debris. Distant voices echoed from deeper within the building. Easing the window open, they slipped inside. The hallway smelled of mold and old cigarettes. The floor creaked underfoot, each step a risk of alerting Ventex's men. As they crept forward, the voices grew clearer. 2 men, talking in low, harsh tones. "Can't find her. The place is a maze," one muttered. "The boss wants results. If she's here, we flush her out." Marcus's jaw clenched. Catherine must be hiding somewhere close, potentially with her children. Rob motioned for him to stay low. They ducked behind a half-collapsed partition, waiting for the men's footsteps to fade. A faint sound drew Marcus's attention. A muffled cough, echoing from one of the rooms. It was a child's cough. He exchanged a glance with Rob, who nodded. That had to be them. They crept toward a door at the end of the hall. Beyond it was a small, windowless room, lit only by a crack in the ceiling. And there, huddled in a corner, was Catherine, clutching her children. She looked exhausted, her face tear-streaked and wary. When she spotted Marcus, her eyes widened. He raised both hands in a calming gesture, whispering, "Catherine, it's me. Please, let us help. Ventex security is here." She pressed the children behind her, trembling. "Why did you come? You'll lead them right to us." Marcus glanced over his shoulder. "They're already here." "We have to get you out now." Terror flashed across Catherine's features, yet in that instant, the children coughed again. A wave of resolve seemed to wash over her. She nodded once, eyes glistening with both dread and hope. Rob stepped forward, gently taking the boy's hand. Marcus moved to Catherine's side, determined to shield them from whatever danger lay beyond the door. Soft sobs escaped one of the children as Marcus helped Catherine guide them through the dingy corridor. Rob led the way, pistol drawn from a hidden holster. He had come prepared, anticipating the worst. Catherine cast anxious glances behind, as if expecting Ventex's men to materialize out of the shadows at any moment. They reached the second-floor window from which Marcus and Rob had entered. Light crept in, revealing the dust motes swirling in the stale air. Rob pushed the window up, then peered outside. One guard near the door, another out by the street, not sure if there are more. Marcus's pulse raced. He glanced at Catherine, who clutched her children, her thin shoulders stiff with tension. "We'll go down first," he murmured. "Then I'll help you get the kids onto the ladder." She nodded, biting her lip. Her gaze flicked to the children, who looked terrified but silent, understanding the gravity of the moment. Carefully, Rob descended the fire escape, scanning the alley. Marcus followed, stepping lightly onto the rusted rungs. When he felt stable, he turned to motion Catherine. She managed to ease one child onto the ladder, guiding the small hands around the metal. Marcus reached up, securing the child. Fear etched the kid's face, but Marcus offered a reassuring smile. "I've got you," he whispered. One by one, the children reached the alley. Catherine came last, every muscle tense. The sounds of scuffling footsteps inside the building made them hasten. Marcus looked up in time to see the door they'd just exited burst open, two men stepping through, scanning the corridor. They were seconds away from being discovered. As soon as Catherine's feet touched the ground, Rob gestured for them to duck behind a stack of wooden pallets. The guard near the building's main entrance hadn't noticed them yet, engrossed in his phone, but they still had to get past him and whoever else might be watching. Marcus turned to Catherine, heart hammering. "We can't stay. We have a car waiting 2 blocks away." She swallowed hard, gripping the children's shoulders. "Lead the way." They crept along the alley, trying to keep behind debris. The kids stifled coughs, their eyes wide. Each time they passed an opening or doorway, they paused, scanning for danger. When they reached the street corner, Marcus spotted another guard standing under a street lamp, occasionally speaking into a handheld radio. Rob motioned toward a side street. "We go that way?" Catherine's breath hitched. "Is it safe?" "It's safer than crossing in front of him," Marcus said, voice hushed. "Stay close." They hurried down the side street, the children clinging to Catherine's hands. Adrenaline surged through Marcus as he glanced around, expecting at any moment to hear shouts of alarm. The city noise around them seemed almost surreal. Delivery trucks rumbling, a distant car horn, the hum of neon signs. At the far end of the block, Marcus's black sedan sat waiting in a loading zone. He fumbled for his keys, hand shaking with relief and lingering fear. Rob stood guard, scanning the area. "Go, go," he urged. Catherine ushered the kids into the back seat. Marcus slid in next to them, while Rob took the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and they peeled away just as a figure in a dark suit stepped onto the street behind them, possibly catching sight of the retreating car. Marcus's throat constricted, but they kept going, turning a corner and losing themselves in the labyrinth of city streets. Only when they were several blocks away did Marcus dare to breathe. Catherine looked pale, trembling from head to toe. The children huddled close, eyes brimming with tears. Marcus gently took her hand. "You're safe now," he said, voice thick with emotion. She pulled her hand back, though not harshly. Her eyes darted from the children to Marcus. "For how long?" "They won't stop." Rob, glancing in the rearview mirror, answered, "We've got a plan, a safe place outside Manhattan. We'll lie low, then talk to a lawyer who can help you. It's time to end this running." Catherine closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I didn't want to drag you into this, Marcus. I never wanted you to face their wrath." Marcus's heart squeezed. "You're not dragging me anywhere. I'm choosing this." "I'm done losing you." For a moment, it seemed like Catherine might protest, but then she sagged against the seat, exhaustion overtaking her. The children, lulled by the car's motion, leaned on her arms, their coughing subsiding into soft whimpers. Rob navigated the streets until they reached a highway on-ramp. Soon the bright lights of Manhattan receded in the distance, replaced by the dark silhouette of the surrounding suburbs. Marcus felt an odd mixture of triumph and dread. They had Catherine at last, out of Ventex's immediate grasp. But what awaited them next could be the most harrowing stretch of the journey. As the car hummed along the deserted road, Marcus glanced back at the city skyline, fear dancing in his chest. The confrontation with Ventex was far from over. Yet, despite everything, Catherine and the children were with him, here, in this moment. If there was a chance for justice, if there was a chance for them to break free of these chains, it would begin now with this escape. He turned to Catherine, who met his gaze through weary eyes. In that silent exchange, they shared the weight of the decision neither could avoid, to stand against those who had driven her into hiding and reclaim the life stolen from them all. The drive northward felt longer than it was, each mile a stretch of tense silence. Catherine and her children dozed in the back seat, pressed together for warmth. Marcus and Rob exchanged few words, both on high alert. Though they had eluded Ventex's men in Chinatown, there was no telling how far that corporation's reach extended. Eventually, they turned onto a winding, tree-lined road leading to a small lake cottage that had once been Marcus and Catherine's weekend retreat. It was well past midnight, and the moonlight revealed a modest structure set against the shimmering waters. The cottage looked lonely but tranquil, a place where nature's hush prevailed over city noise. Rob cut the headlights as they approached. "I'll do a quick sweep around the perimeter," he said, rolling to a stop on the gravel drive. "Better safe than sorry." Marcus gently roused Catherine. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion flickering across her face until she recalled where she was, and with whom. One of the children stirred and whimpered, while the other kept sleeping against Catherine's shoulder. Marcus saw that she was trembling, whether from cold or fear he couldn't be sure. When Rob returned and gave the all clear, Marcus opened the car door. "Come inside," he said softly. "It's not fancy, but it's safe." Catherine glanced out at the lake, the moon's reflection dancing on its surface. She lifted her gaze to the cottage, brow creasing with unspoken memories. Slowly, she unbuckled the children, coaxing them awake. "It's okay," she whispered to them. "We're going to a safe place, just for now." Inside, Marcus flicked on a single lamp, revealing a small living area with worn furniture and dusty curtains. The air smelled faintly musty from disuse. Still, a sense of relief washed over him. At least here, they could breathe without fear of immediate pursuit. Rob helped carry in a few bags and locked the door behind them. Catherine set her children on a threadbare couch, exhaustion etched into her features. The kids blinked sleepily, adjusting to the unfamiliar surroundings. Marcus pointed toward a tiny bedroom. "There's a bed in there. Linens might be old, but at least you can rest." Nodding, Catherine guided the children inside. Through the thin walls, Marcus soon heard her soothing them in hushed tones, promising they were okay. He recalled the countless times they'd dreamed of fixing up this cottage together. Now it was a makeshift hideout. Rob rubbed the back of his neck, yawning. "I'll stay on the couch," he said. "Keep watch in case someone tries to show up unannounced." Marcus offered a tired smile. "Thanks, I'll take the armchair. We'll figure out a schedule to keep an eye on things." They both settled in for what remained of the night, but sleep came grudgingly. Marcus's mind whirled with questions. How close had Ventex been to snatching Catherine? Would they trace her here? He stared out the small window, glimpsing the lake under the moonlight, remembering the last time he and Catherine had been here, happy, in love, full of plans for a future that never arrived. A few hours later, the faint glow of dawn crept in. Marcus rose to make coffee on the old gas stove, rummaging for filters in the cupboards. Rob stirred, yawning and running a hand over his stubbly chin. Moments later, Catherine emerged from the bedroom, moving quietly so as not to wake the children. She froze upon seeing Marcus, as though remembering all over again that he was part of this picture now. He offered a mug of steaming coffee. "No milk. Sorry. I didn't have time to stock the fridge." She accepted it, cradling the mug in her thin hands. Standing there in the dim light, Catherine looked exhausted, but there was a glint of relief in her eyes, tempered by wariness. "Thank you," she said softly. He leaned against the kitchen counter. "We have food supplies in the car trunk, canned goods, cereal, not much, but enough to get by for a few days." Her gaze flicked around the small living space. "Why did you bring us here?" Marcus swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. "Because it's away from prying eyes. Because I thought you might feel safer with water and trees around instead of sirens and traffic. And because this place was once special to both of us." She lowered her eyes, exhaling shakily. "I'm not sure anywhere is safe from Ventex." "I understand," he said, "but for now, this is the best I can do. We have allies ready to help you testify, protect you, whatever you decide. This doesn't have to be permanent, just until you and the kids are steady." Catherine nodded, sipping the coffee, her expression unreadable. Silence lingered between them, filled with tension and unspoken memories. Outside, birds began chirping, heralding a sunrise that cast a gentle glow through the worn curtains. Standing there, they both knew that though they'd escaped the city, the true fight against Ventex was only beginning. Rob emerged from the bathroom, pushing up his sleeves. "I'll do a perimeter check in daylight, see if anyone followed us." Marcus nodded, glancing back at Catherine. He could almost feel the weight of her guarded heart. He hoped, in time, that she'd see he wasn't the enemy. For now, though, she needed rest, shelter, and reassurance that she and her children wouldn't spend another night on the streets, terrified of footsteps at every corner. A few days passed in a blur of cautious routine at the lake cottage. Marcus made the trek into a nearby small town for groceries, while Rob remained vigilant, surveying the property for signs of unwanted visitors. Catherine, however, rarely ventured outside, except to let the children stretch their legs for a few moments in the yard. Even then, she kept them close, often glancing around with anxious eyes. That afternoon, Marcus returned with basic supplies and medication for the kids' lingering coughs. As he stepped inside, the younger child looked up from a makeshift coloring station on the worn coffee table, offering a timid smile. The older sibling clung to Catherine's side, warier by nature. Marcus set a bag down, pulling out children's cough syrup, tissues, and a small box of crayons. Catherine watched silently, arms folded across her chest. It was clear she appreciated the help, but wasn't sure how to express it. As the children busied themselves with the new crayons, Marcus gestured at the medication. "I spoke with the pharmacist in town. He said this should help with their cough if they take it regularly." She took the bottle, nodding. "Thank you." Her voice was still subdued, but less sharp than before. Marcus glanced at the drawing spread on the table, bright scribbles of trees, a shaky outline of the cottage. One child had drawn 4 stick figures. He recognized Catherine and the twins, and then, off to the side, a taller figure that could only be him. His chest tightened at the sight, memories of the child's earlier drawing that implied a lonely, uncertain man in the background. "That's nice," he said softly, pointing to it. The child beamed with pride before returning to sketch more. Catherine cleared her throat. "They're feeling a little better. The fresh air helps." Marcus offered a small smile. "I'm glad." He hesitated, wanting to address the unspoken tension between them. "I know you don't trust me fully yet, but is there anything you need, anything else I can do?" She lowered her gaze to the floor. "You're already doing too much. I keep wondering why." His heart clenched. "Because once, not so long ago, I wanted to spend my life with you, because I care about you more than I can put into words. I can't turn my back on you, on your children, just because things got complicated." Catherine pressed her lips together. For a moment, something like regret flickered in her expression. She stepped away, busying herself with tidying the small kitchen as a distraction. Marcus watched her, remembering the times they worked side by side in the same space, the warmth that used to flow so easily between them. Now an invisible wall stood in its place. As the children continued drawing, Rob emerged from outside, quietly shutting the door. He gave Marcus a meaningful look. "We need to talk," he said under his breath, nodding toward the porch. Marcus followed him out, letting the screen door close gently behind. Rob folded his arms. "No obvious signs of trackers, but we can't assume they've given up. I've also been in touch with Robert Gray. He says the evidence against Ventex is piling up, but we still need Catherine's official statement. Otherwise, it's hearsay." Marcus raked a hand through his hair. "She's still too scared to even mention Ventex by name. Every time I bring it up, she shuts down. She may not have a choice soon. Gray said there's talk the district attorney might open a formal investigation. If that happens, they'll want Catherine to testify." Rob's eyes flicked to the cottage windows, beyond which Catherine moved about in the shadows. "We both know she's the key to blowing this wide open." Marcus nodded. "Give her time," he said, though he wasn't sure how much they had. "She's been running for 6 years. That kind of fear doesn't vanish overnight." Rob clasped Marcus's shoulder. "I get it, but be ready in case Ventex or the authorities come knocking. If she doesn't voluntarily cooperate, they might try to subpoena her. That could turn ugly, especially if she still feels threatened." They heard a soft knock on the inside of the screen door. Catherine stood there, cradling one child in her arms. "Marcus," she said, hesitating, "could we talk alone?" Rob took the cue, discreetly heading around the side of the cottage. Marcus followed Catherine back inside, where she led him to the small bedroom. The child in her arms had drifted asleep, cheek pressed to Catherine's shoulder. She gently laid the child on the bed and beckoned Marcus closer. Her eyes flickered with conflicting emotions. "These past few days, I've been thinking I never wanted you tangled up in my mess." Marcus swallowed. "You didn't create this mess. Ventex did." She looked down, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "I uncovered financial discrepancies, fraud, embezzlement. I tried to alert the authorities quietly, but some people threatened me. When I got engaged to you, Ventex's top brass panicked, afraid I'd hand evidence over to your company and destroy them. They cornered me, said they'd ruin not just you, but your entire family. I thought disappearing was the only way to keep you safe, especially once I found out I was pregnant." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He glanced at the children in the other room. "You left because you thought they'd target me." She nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "And I was right to worry. Look how far they've gone now." He wanted to embrace her, but he sensed she wasn't ready for that yet. "You're not alone anymore," he said, voice trembling. "We have lawyers who can protect you. If you testify, Ventex can't keep this buried." She let out a shaky breath, nodding slowly. "I'm just so tired of running. I'm ready to fight back, but I'm terrified. If they find us again, my kids—" Marcus gently took her hand. "We'll protect them. You have my word." In the dim bedroom light, Catherine's expression softened, as if a small piece of her burden lifted. Her eyes flickered to the sleeping child, and then back to Marcus. He squeezed her hand, feeling the faint stir of hope between them. Even as danger loomed, they were on the cusp of something they'd been denied for too long, a future decided by truth instead of fear. Over the next week, a cautious sense of routine developed at the cottage. Catherine gradually opened up, revealing more details of Ventex's misdeeds. From old emails to internal memos, she'd pieced together a pattern of falsified reports and fraudulent charity programs. Each day, Marcus relayed this information to Robert Gray, who documented every scrap of evidence meticulously. Meanwhile, the children began to show signs of easing into the newfound stability. They played by the lake's edge under Catherine's watchful eye, collecting smooth stones and giggling at small fish darting in the shallows. For Marcus, it was a bittersweet sight. He yearned to join them, to share in those simple joys, but he respected Catherine's boundaries. Little by little, she let him help, offering snacks, reading them bedtime stories. Still, a vestige of caution lingered in her gaze whenever they talked about the future. One afternoon, Rob returned from a supply run in town, exhaling heavily as he set a newspaper on the coffee table. The headline read, "Ventex under fire, insider corruption allegations mount." The story mentioned an unnamed source rumored to hold damning evidence. Marcus exchanged a worried look with Rob. The press was circling like hawks, and the more public this became, the more desperate Ventex might grow. "That's not all," Rob said. "Gray told me the district attorney's office is preparing a subpoena for Catherine. We tried to buy time, but if the subpoena is issued, we can't keep her hidden." Marcus glanced toward the bedroom, where Catherine rested after a sleepless night tending to a feverish child. "If that happens, she'll have to show up in court or risk legal complications." Rob gave a grim nod. "It could be a chance to put Ventex away for good, assuming we can ensure her safety." Later, Marcus gently approached Catherine with the news. She paled, hugging her arms around herself. "So, there's no more hiding," she whispered, voice shaking. "If I don't testify willingly, they'll force me." Marcus sat on the edge of a worn chair, leaning forward. "Gray's working to negotiate protective measures. Witness protection is on the table. You and the kids could relocate, have new identities if it comes to that." She lifted her eyes, fear and sadness mingling. "But that means starting over again. Somewhere else. Another life, away from everyone we know." Marcus's chest tightened. "If we can bring Ventex down decisively, maybe it won't come to that. But Catherine, we can't let them terrorize you forever." She nodded, letting out a trembling exhale. "I know. I'm just scared." He reached for her hand, hesitating before his fingertips brushed hers. This time, she didn't pull away. "We'll do it together," he said gently. "I'll be with you every step." In the days that followed, calls with Gray became more frequent. They planned how Catherine would deliver her testimony and how to coordinate with law enforcement. Marcus hovered protectively, aware that Ventex might strike at any moment. Rob took extra precautions. He installed a basic security system around the cottage, rigged motion sensors near the driveway, and even set up a rotating schedule for night watches. Despite the tense undercurrent, a fragile sense of unity emerged. Sometimes, after the children went to bed, Marcus and Catherine sat by the lake, listening to frogs croak in the reeds. She would talk about small memories, a meeting where she first suspected Ventex's CEO of lying, or the day she found out she was pregnant with twins. Her voice quivered with regret and relief. Marcus offered quiet empathy, recognizing that she was finally unburdening herself of secrets she'd carried for 6 long years. He felt heartbreak over what she had endured. Threats, isolation, the struggle of raising 2 children on the run. Yet in these nighttime confidences, he glimpsed the woman he once knew, fiercely protective, morally driven, still capable of deep compassion. One evening, while the moon shimmered on the water, Catherine spoke softly. "I never stopped loving you. Even when I left, it wasn't about abandoning us, it was about shielding you." Marcus's throat tightened. The weight of her words made his eyes burn with unshed tears. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to promise her a future free from fear, but he simply said, "I know," because anything more felt too overwhelming in that fragile moment. They sat side by side as a gentle breeze rustled the trees. In the distance, the children slept peacefully for perhaps the first time in their lives. Within those quiet, tender intervals, it became clear that while Ventex's threat remained, a new chapter was opening. One where Catherine no longer carried her burden alone, and Marcus no longer wandered through life, haunted by her absence. 3 weeks later, a swirl of emotions gripped Catherine as she stepped out of a black sedan in front of the courthouse. She was dressed simply, her hair pulled back, and her children stayed behind with a trusted social worker. Marcus walked beside her, pressing a protective hand to her back, his presence a steady anchor amid the crowd of reporters and curious onlookers. The courthouse steps loomed large, a testament to the weight of justice she was about to seek. Cameras flashed, voices clamored for a statement, and police officers stood watchfully near the entrance. Catherine's eyes darted around, wary of any face that might belong to a Ventex operative. Rob and Robert Gray were already inside, preparing for the formal hearing. Marcus felt the tension radiating from her. Leaning in, he whispered, "We're almost there. Just a few steps more." She drew a shaking breath and nodded. Then, lifting her chin, she walked forward through the clamor, each footstep echoing the choice she had made to stop running. Inside, the corridors bustled with legal aides, attorneys, and a swirl of subdued conversations. Catherine's stomach churned with anxiety, but she held firm, remembering every hardship, every threat that had driven her to live in shadows. In the hearing room, Robert Gray greeted them with a tight smile. "The DA's office is ready. You'll give your testimony under oath. Keep calm. We have plenty of evidence to back your words." Catherine's heart pounded, but she found strength in the supportive faces around her. Marcus, Rob, Gray. She took her seat, and as the hearing commenced, a hush fell over the room. The prosecution laid out a summary of their case. Ventex executives engaged in systematic fraud, siphoning funds from philanthropic initiatives and strong-arming potential whistleblowers. When Catherine's name was called, she rose. Approaching the witness stand, she placed a hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Her voice trembled at first, but as she recounted Ventex's corruption, reading from her notes, referencing documents, she found a fierce clarity. She described how she'd once believed in honest marketing, only to discover manipulated data and stolen funds. She named names, painted a picture of intimidation and secrecy. The legal team on the Ventex side protested, but Gray countered, calmly citing evidence Catherine had preserved. At one point, the Ventex attorney attempted to discredit her, implying she vanished because she was complicit. She stood her ground, eyes flashing with long-suppressed anger. "I ran," she said, voice reverberating in the silent chamber, "because I was told if I didn't disappear, those closest to me would be destroyed, and I believed them because I saw what they were capable of." Marcus watched from his seat, heart aching for the years of fear Catherine had endured. He clenched his fists, resisting the urge to speak out. This was her moment to reclaim her voice, and she did. When she finished, the hush in the courtroom felt charged with a new power. The judge acknowledged the gravity of her testimony, and the DA's office formally moved to investigate Ventex's senior executives. After the hearing, Catherine emerged into the corridor, breath hitching. Tears brimmed in her eyes. Marcus caught her by the shoulders. She leaned against him, shuddering with relief and residual terror. Rob and Gray joined them, offering quiet congratulations. "Next step," Gray said, "is for the DA to press charges. They'll probably arrest those involved soon. Now that we have enough to move forward." Catherine managed a small nod, tears slipping down her cheeks. "What if Ventex tries to retaliate?" Gray assured her the authorities were prepared to provide protection. Rob patted her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore. Don't forget that." Marcus led her outside, into the crisp afternoon air. A cluster of reporters pressed in with questions. Catherine glanced at Marcus, who nodded. Summoning newfound courage, she answered a few inquiries, stating only that she had provided evidence of wrongdoing and was cooperating with the authorities. When they finally slipped away, they found a quiet corner of the courthouse plaza, away from the cameras. Catherine looked at Marcus, tears still shining in her eyes. Her posture was lighter, as though a heavy cloak had just slid off her shoulders. "I feel like I can breathe," she said, voice trembling. "For the first time in years, I'm not running." Marcus brushed a tear from her cheek. "You're free," he murmured. "And so are the kids. There might be some challenges ahead, but Ventex can't hide behind threats anymore." She fell into his embrace then, letting out a sob she'd held back for far too long. He held her, gently stroking her hair, feeling his own eyes sting with the weight of all they'd lost and all they'd finally regained. In that embrace lay a promise that the future they once imagined might now be possible, however fragile. Catherine pulled back slightly, gazing up at him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on me." He kissed her forehead, voice rough with emotion. "I never will. Neither will Rob, nor Gray, nor anyone who stood with you. We have a lot to figure out. Where you'll live, what happens next, but you don't have to face any of it alone." She exhaled, nodding. Through the swirl of people exiting the courthouse behind them, they stood rooted in that moment. Even as the official legal wheels turned, even as the story was far from fully resolved, Catherine and Marcus finally stepped out from the shadows, free to hold each other, free to hope, and free to envision a life that would no longer be defined by fear. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.